This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
Good morning. Our second workshop of our budget season. Glad to see the libraries here. Hopefully I don't think there's much going on with your budget, so if you'd like to take us through your proposal, we'd appreciate it.
I gave you handouts today. One is about statistics on the library and just some of the programs we have at the library. So before I begin, I just want to go over a brief overview of last year's activities at the library. Andrew Carnegie once said that a library outranks any other one thing a community can do to benefit its people. He believed that a free public library would give people the chance to educate and lift themselves, no matter their origin, their wealth, or their social status. It's been over 100 years since Carnegie uttered these words, but the North Haven Library's long-standing mission of providing information, educational, cultural, and recreation needs to the community still remains the same as in Carnegie's days. The format of some of these library resources has changed, but the need to provide our residents has not. We must continue to maintain and improve these services for the benefit of our community. Books and magazines are still important to the people of North Haven. Over 130,000 print items circulated last year. In comparison to towns with a similar population, North Haven circulated 16% more items. E-resources have been the biggest jump in circulation with a 19% increase of e-books, e-audio, and e-magazines, and they account for 8% of our total circulation. 48% of our residents have library cards compared to a statewide average of 39%, and we offer over 500 programs. We offered over 500 programs last year on topics such as history, art, business, and technology. So when we get to the budget pages, I know that we've had a lot of state budget cuts, so I think I've kept this budget very lean. I hope you agree. And I feel that what I've requested are really necessary items to maintain our services. So the first request is for an increase in office supplies of $1,200. We haven't had an increase since 2014. And our items of barcodes, processing books, barcodes, library cards, book covers, that's all increased in price. For heat and plant maintenance, the average actual cost of the last 4 years has been $9,300. There's an increase there. Programs have become increasingly more popular. We've had an increase of 5% of attendance. The increase is for $1,500. Lion. Okay. In the past, the state has provided a daily delivery service to fulfill interlibrary loans. Libraries have been cut too, and we had a service. We now have the service on a limited basis, so the Lion Consortium has hired a private contractor, so that reflects this increase. Do you have any, before I go on to capital?
Good. I was just noting to myself more items that the state
Has cut.
that cuts rolling down to municipalities.
Right. Okay, and capital security system. Our library is open to all, so we never know who's walking through the library doors. So the past few months, we've had theft of library materials. This is ongoing. We've actually had some panhandlers who have come in and have been asking elderly people for money. Our back door was kicked in. These are things we don't know. We don't know who's doing these. We have no type of security system. So by purchasing a security system, we feel that we'll make both the staff and our patrons feel safer.
Is the building secured at night or talking during the day?
During the
When
day.
it's open?
It's during the day.
So would this be a
Camera system?
camera system? or
Camera
is there-
system, yeah.
Right. Is it an access system too?
I'm sorry?
Is it an access system too?
What do you mean by access?
Well,
Let
that-
someone in through a door.
Yeah, a door, or you have to have your library card or something to swipe it in, what is it?
No, it's just, I mean, anyone can walk into the library. It would be during the day, so we can see, you know, when we had these panhandlers,
Yeah.
you know, no one could identify them, we couldn't see them doing it. The library door was kicked in, we have no idea, you know, who did that.
Right.
And the lobby lighting?
And lobby lighting, we have this chandelier that has not worked for years.
Many years.
Yeah, I think it's probably 8 years, something like that. And it's really dark in the evening. And that's the concern.
We
is
should be able
that-
to take care of that in-house.
Well, we have the library, Friends Library Bookstore there now, too. And without the good lighting, especially at night or during dark days, it's pretty
you
hard
can't
to...
see. The chandelier, there's no way to, the chandelier is 2 flights up. One time, since we've been open for 17 years, they actually had to bring in scaffolding to change the light bulbs. This took, I don't know, 2 days to do, you know, 5 minutes to do change the light.
And that's
It's
what it
very,
is.
very
It's bulbs
costly.
that are
So we're
basically
looking,
Right.
You can't get a scissor lift in there, or?
No, probably.
Why, the door's too small?
yeah.
All right, well, I may stop by to take a look at it.
Yeah, I think I would
Look up the-
encourage everybody to
we'll get it
take a look
Come out
at it.
come at night.
Buy some books away.
We'll get it addressed.
Yeah. So what the request is for putting it on the wall scouts is for additional lighting.
The security figure you've come up with, did you send out quotes for this?
That was a figure I got from last year.
I see. Okay. Overall, maintenance on the building, you experiencing any abnormal issues? Roof
Well,
leaks,
we've had leaks again.
You have, I was just wondering.
Yeah.
Is-
We thought we were okay, but last snowstorm, we had some leaks.
Can our maintenance guys help you out?
We don't really know where they're coming from. They're not in the same place all the time.
I mean, sometimes you gotta realize, if it was a heavy storm and it backed up further than what's normal, it's beyond the ice shields, it's beyond, and it hasn't been consistent, it's just an occasional now and then when we get really, really heavy storms.
Pretty much,
Okay.
yeah.
Any other questions for our library staff?
No, I always ask about the roof every year, so she's already
I'm
answered.
sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jim beat
Sorry.
you.
We thought,
Sorry,
yeah,
Mike.
You got beat.
That was my only question.
I don't know. That roof is-
Everyone's good then?
Yeah, I think, the library does a great job.
does.
People
I
love the
agree.
library.
Great.
Pat's come really
Fantastic.
forward with great programs. We had our economic development breakfast last year, and she spoke very nicely to the business community, and so she's done a great job, and we got some things here we have to look at, legitimate requests, so we'll see what we can do here, okay?
If you can explore just more on your security system, see if you can get some more harder, firmer numbers than a budget from a year ago,
Okay.
it might be help just passing through finance, and we'll take a look at it when we're going
Okay.
through capital. If there's nothing else, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Very nice, thank you.
And if Kelly wants to switch the camera over to community service, come up here. Were you trying to follow Victor's lead?
He's gonna reduce his request. He'll be Victor by,
I'm set. We're not breaking.
What page are you on now?
Why is it only 25% for the first year? So what happens the second year?
All right, if I can have everybody's attention again. Community service.
Okay, good morning, everyone.
What page is it?
It's on page 21. I'm sorry, that's the library. Page 33. As you can see, there's no handout because for the most part, most of the lines have stayed consistent from last year to this year. But there's a couple of things I want to point out in each of the departments. If you look on page 33 under Community Services, the only changes we've had are the increases to the line items for personnel full-time. They received contractual raises, and there was one other increase was for the BH Care fee, which went up by $3,000 from last year. That 130 includes $7,000 for other consultants that may be needed throughout the year. And I also want to say that the revenue for this department is, in 15 and 16, it was around $225 each year. This past year, it jumped to $264. And as it's going now, we're looking at probably about $252 for the end of this year. So they're holding their own and covering their expenses, so.
And they're offering the same number of
We're
programs?
offering the same services, right? And what we have right now is one counselor who's going for a class on divorce mediation, trying to expand some of the work we do and see if that could also generate some revenue, but the person has to get their certifications every year. So this is a good course. Maybe we can expand what we're doing and move on from there. And hopefully it'll generate some revenue if we could.
You look back over the years when we changed, I mean, this has really been one of the shining things in town.
It has. It's provided, I think the service level is even higher. Plus, what always gets forgotten about is the fact that we're saving an additional $25,000 a year by not having to pay for a state license for licensed counselors because BH Care is handling that for us.
I am really impressed this path that the town went down.
And BH Care provided a tremendous amount of resources for our counselors, a lot of learning opportunities, and I just think that's a good thing. And right now, at any time, I think our customer client list is roughly about 160, 170 people using the service, so.
And I should point out that we didn't replace the department head, so we saved another $100,000 down through the years by doing this consolidation, having head oversee it, not hiring the $100,000 position that was once here, saving the $25,000 a year in a state license fee, and generating more services and greater revenue.
That's the key. The services have expanded so much, and the costs have just diminished.
Okay.
Any questions on community service?
Well, under you, the next, is there any other administration or management under you that manages this department?
There has to be a manager over there from BH Care who oversees the counselors, because I'm not licensed to do that.
Okay.
We get the benefit of
All right,
that.
so the management level is the subcontract, the vendor?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
That's provided by them. That's in their fee.
okay.
And so is the licensing. The annual or the regular audits that they have to go through are handled by them as well.
Yeah, all right. It's a type of privatization of this service duty responsibility,
But it's a good working joint venture.
certainly. For them to cover the cost of their certification is really good to our bottom line.
And the increased services.
As long as you're satisfied with not just the quality, but the breadth of what they offer, so that, again, all communities do worry about somebody falling through the cracks, something not being handled. And I'm sure you're always, someone in town is always working to help identify people who need services such as this.
Okay, we have APRNs there that can prescribe medication. We have professional counseling services, substance abuse services, drug and alcohol services, family and domestic violence services. And Ed just talked about, the addition.
Divorce.
Is there good publicity about all the services that we offer? Do you think that that's adequate? I mean, I'm sure it's within the calendar.
I think it's a great question.
Is it on the website?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I also have had them put together a one-sheet summary of their services, so I know that's out there.
Might be a good article for North Haven Magazine.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point you make.
It is a good point.
It is. It's a very good point.
And each year, I think they've tried to increase the number of services that they provide, so,
Where are they located at?
right across the street.
In the rec building?
Yes, yep.
The services have increased exponentially over the last several years. I really am amazed by it.
Now, there's larger cities and towns that don't do the things we do. Not everybody does this. We're doing it, making money at it, offering a larger array of services and saving money.
Right. First floor, Jim, first door on your left.
Anything else for
Thank you.
Ed on community service? You take us through Park and Rec too,
Yeah, yep.
or which is,
The next page, well, we're not there yet. Regional health and visiting nurse, those are both, the figures we get are provided by them, so that's what we put in the budget, okay? Senior center, there's no change to any of the lines except the first one for personnel, full-time, and that's only because of contractual raises. And page 35, under recreation, that's exactly the same thing. The only increase here is contractual raises on the first line.
So the pool, the fees for the pool maintenance that they do every year, that hasn't gone up, or looks like it?
No, we've kept them the same, because if you look at the actual for 17, they really didn't go up. We can manage them based on the numbers I have. And also in the capital item, we always put in $25,000 for the annual pool closing in the summer.
Ed, the town owns the pool, right?
yes.
Outside of individuals who become members there, do we charge the swim teams to use the pool?
No,
No.
that's school. You wouldn't charge your school.
I'm actually not asking for today, I'm asking for the Board of Ed meeting, which I know is coming up.
Okay.
No, we don't. Then on page 38. Down near the bottom, I just have the rec pool maintenance for $25,000. That's for the annual work that has to be done in August. And, excuse me, I'm putting in 20 grand towards that senior bus replacement, because sooner or later that bus is going to break. And we used to get 80% funding from the Greater New Haven Transit District,
Which doesn't.
and we're not getting that anymore. So
How much is a new bus?
I want to say about 80,000.
Didn't we put some away last year?
We have
Yes.
40,000 set aside, and so this will give us 60. So at least I'm in the ballpark with this.
We are proactive, just like for the audit. We'd like to spread it out instead of getting the budget hit in one year with something we know is coming.
Reval's another issue that we do.
Exactly.
We book it every year.
So how
Right.
old is the bus?
Oh, quite old.
So
7, 8, 9
we're
years.
trying to get another.
Not as old as
two
Victor's.
big-
Victor's bus is-
Equipment.
It's getting
Victor
there.
brings us
So we're
pictures
trying to
of
get
this.
another couple of years out of it by
Yeah, but
putting.
sometimes
Yeah.
we keep bringing them to
Saw that back
our
truck.
garage, getting them fixed, but
Driving
sooner or
down
later.
Washington Avenue.
Yeah, kind of like Victor's,
Yeah.
you're rebuilding the bus, okay.
Anything else for Ed?
Doing a great job, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
Good job, Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Kowski. Kelly, if you want to pause this for a minute? Welcome, Chief.
Thank you. How are you?
Morning.
We're on a roll this morning. Keep it going.
All right, we'll keep your time schedule going here for you as well, okay?
Would you like to take us through your presentation?
I would. So I'm gonna-
PowerPoint first?
Yeah, so this is kind of going to be a combination of a PowerPoint and then some points that will get brought up on the board or on the television screen rather, and we can discuss them in detail. And of course, any questions you have throughout it, please feel free to let me know. I'll have some handouts for you shortly as well, which will kind of help describe some of the things that we're requesting and some of the items that I know have been discussed in the past. I'd like to start by thanking the members of the Board of Finance for meeting once again on a Saturday morning. It is not snowing out for once, which is nice because it normally is when we get together, so it's 50 degrees outside. You have myself, the Chief of the Department, Paul Janiszewski, and Chairman of the Board, Pasquale Nozzolillo, beside me for you this morning to present this. This is my third budget workshop since being appointed Chief of the Department in September 2015. And today I prepared a presentation that's both mindful of the economic outlook, balanced with the needs of the department. I recognize that the outlook for the state budget directly impacts the town budget. However, it is my responsibility to bring to you a budget that reflects the needs of the department regardless. And it is unfortunately up to the board and the members of the public to decide what needs to be funded. So this budget, we'll start to go through it. and hand handouts to you as I get there. Chairman?
There's no question that our Board of Fire Commissioners are all in agreement with what is being submitted before you today. We strongly feel that we have a fiduciary responsibility to articulate clearly what the needs of the department are. And as the chief indicated, we are thoroughly aware of the issues as far as the state is concerned and funding towns and cities throughout Connecticut and the difficulties of that. But as far as our commission is concerned, we absolutely believe that what the chief is proposing is what is necessary to provide fire safety for the residents, business owners, and visitors of our town. So I know that you have a daunting task. There's no question about it. You're trying to allocate monies for all of these requests, whether it be capital or budgetary requirements, and we understand that everything can't be fulfilled, but we certainly have the obligation to present it to you. So in that spirit, we present this budget to you folks. Thank you.
So as we have done so in the past, I'm going to start by just giving you a brief overview of how we operate. I realize that members of the board may have a keen understanding, however the public may not, tuning in for the first time. So for those that are not familiar with how we operate, we're a combination fire department, meaning we rely on both volunteer and career members of the department to fulfill our needs. There are 4 fire stations in town, 3 of which are solely volunteer, and 1 of which is paid career staff, which is headquarters. It has 8 firefighters assigned to it with 3 apparatus. And I'm going to get into that in a little more detail in a minute so that you understand exactly what those 3 apparatus are, the limitations and the functions of them. We are tasked with providing advanced level life support, ALS, will be referred to from this point on, at the paramedic level of service in 2010, and we received 1 additional firefighter per shift at that time, which brought us from a 7-man shift to an 8-man shift. So today we still currently run an 8-man shift. Multiple times every month, we see that the paramedic needs to assist residents or visitors to North Haven to the hospital. That means that for that period of time, there is not a paramedic left in town to respond to incidents. When I refer to the 3 apparatus that are staffed at headquarters, pictured on the screen are the 3 apparatus that are staffed at headquarters, and only those 3 apparatus. Each of them has specific functions and limitations. The paramedic is riding on the rescue, which is referred to as Rescue 1. There's 2 firefighters assigned to the ladder truck. That is a BLS ladder truck providing 2 EMTs. And there are 3 firefighters and an officer assigned to the engine, which is also BLS. This brings us to a total of 8 staff, around the clock, 24/7. And that is where those 8 staff ride. If we ever were to take away from that 8 staff, one of those apparatus now need to run light. And each of them run with the staffing they have so they can perform in the function that they have to perform.
Excuse me, Chief. So ALS, is that advanced life support? And what's BLS?
BLS is basic life support, so that's EMTs only.
Okay.
So when that rescue rides to the hospital, or let's reframe that. When we send a paramedic to the hospital, because the commercial ambulance provider provides 2 EMTs, and the patient is sick enough or has severe enough symptoms where we have to provide paramedic and ALS service, we send the paramedic to the hospital, and the rescue has to go pick up the paramedic. So now you're down to 6 firefighters, because all you have left are 4 in the engine and 2 in the truck. Recurring calls that continue to come in after that, you now begin to lose the engine, or you now begin to lose a truck. So I spread 4,500 alarms through these 3 apparatus. So multiple times every month, we're seeing that the rescue is assisting transporting to the hospital. And if you recall, and I'll cover this more in detail in a moment, we began to capture that revenue by a billing service that bills just for the paramedic level service to the individual who needed it through their insurance company. And I'm realizing now, looking at the screen and looking at my computer screen, truck 1 is 2 firefighters in BLS. It's not appearing that way, but it does here.
Excuse me, Chief.
Yep.
Reiterate what you just got through saying. Why do you end up with less men on the, one goes to the hospital? How does that work out again?
Yeah, sure. So when we provide transport to the hospital, so let's say right now a chest pain call comes in, and I hear something going on now, so it could be happening. A chest pain call comes in, and the rescue is the first to respond from the fire department, and the commercial ambulance service provides an ambulance. If there's 2 EMTs with that ambulance, and the patient is experiencing chest pains, it's almost always going to be an ALS call. You need to rule out the presence of a cardiac event. We will now lose that paramedic that we have on a shift to the hospital for approximately the next hour to an hour and a half.
Why, if there's 2 EMTs?
So it's a great question. So the level of service that an EMT can provide and the level of service that a paramedic can provide are night and day. And we can cover that. There's a slide later on that kind of covers that. But EMTs can provide very basic life-saving functions, whereas a paramedic has a variety of medications that can be started, can provide advanced airway procedures, and can interpret heart rhythms to begin further steps at the hospital to be able to open the cath lab and get the patient treated right away and recognize that on scene. In somebody's living room, they can actually activate the cath lab at either St. Ray's or Yale.
So the ambulance does not have to supply a paramedic?
That's correct. Right. And that's why we lose our only paramedic on shift and 2 firefighters as often as we do throughout the day, because the ambulance is required to provide, not required to provide a paramedic. So when they arrive on scene, and they're struggling, as a lot of places are, they're struggling to keep paramedics employed because paramedics still are, there's not a lot of them out there.
And then it's the town's responsibility to get our man back.
Correct, which is why we send the rescue to go pick up the paramedic, because it is not uncommon for the paramedic to be at Yale New Haven Hospital on York Street and another call to come in and the rescue starts responding from Yale New Haven Hospital. The sooner that I can get that paramedic back in town and those 2 firefighters back in town, the better that we are.
That very issue has been a major issue for many of the meetings that we've had with the general public, Jim. Significant concern that the town has no paramedic during that specific period of time. And actually, we lose the second firefighter because they're going to pick them up. So obviously, what you can hear from the chief is an addition of another paramedic. And that was a message that was loud and clear from the general public that we have met with consistently throughout this last year. And it's been a major, has been a major concern during the election cycle, as we all know, because of some circumstances that have had arisen, in the last quarter of the year.
It's concerning that the ambulances only can provide basic life support, because I think people's expectation is that an ambulance comes, they're getting a paramedic, and that's not true.
I would assume you can structure with whoever the ambulance responding that a paramedic be present as part of the requirements.
So
Be
that's-
in town.
Yeah, so that, unfortunately, that's not something that can happen tomorrow. In fact, it's going to take a great deal of time for that to happen. And it may come at a cost to the town, a cost that would probably be equivalent to what we're looking to do here. I can tell you that neighboring towns that provide 1 paramedic 24/7, just not even an ambulance, a paramedic 24/7, cost 2 different towns in the neighborhood of $400,000 each. So paramedics in an ALS service does not come at a cheap expense. We need to start to look at providing for the citizens and the visitors of the town, providing additional paramedics. And we're no different than towns around us. The commercial ambulance service is not obligated to provide a paramedic. They provide 2 EMTs. State law does not require there to be a paramedic on an ambulance, only that there be 2 EMTs. So this is beyond the scope of what we
Yeah,
can
but the town
fix.
can make it a requirement, I would assume. Or would it make sense to put an EMT and a paramedic on Rescue 1 and the other paramedic on Engine 1 so that you can always have someone in town?
Yeah, I think what makes sense is the plan that I'm going to have for you shortly.
Just another
Sure.
option that
Yep.
doesn't cost as much.
Sure.
Does the paramedic get paid more than the standard firefighter?
It's a stipend.
It's a stipend, yeah. Yeah.
It's more personnel, number of personnel than.
Would it behoove the town or you, chief, to encourage other firefighters to become paramedics?
Is it my understanding, are we still on the path that anyone you do hire
Sure.
is a paramedic and you cross-train them as a firefighter?
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute, because I've heard
I
that.
have
Sure.
a question.
Yep.
Why would a town rescue vehicle and an AMR vehicle be at the same site?
Okay, so there's a lot. Let me start writing some of these down so I can make sure I answer your question, all right? So let's cover that first, all right, and then we'll get into the chairman's question. So the reason that the fire department model was adopted back in the early 80s, the town decided to start having the fire department respond to medical incidents in town. From 1974 to the mid-80s, that was not the case. The fire department responds first because the ambulance, there's too many unknowns where the ambulance is coming from. The ambulance could be coming from Milford, could be coming from New Haven, it could be coming from locally. And depending on how many calls are occurring, when somebody calls 911 with a medical emergency, you want somebody there to at least start rendering aid, to render aid, to perform life-saving procedures, and to recognize what services may be needed. Maybe paramedic is not always needed at every call. So we can talk about all the paramedics we want in terms of staffing, but not every call requires a paramedic. EMTs can typically recognize if a paramedic is needed or not. They're trained to that level to recognize, does this patient exhibiting symptoms that require a paramedic, or does a chief complaint look like it requires a paramedic? So the fire department is always set up to respond first, to begin to render aid, to provide some degree of life-saving measures until the ambulance arrives. We see ambulance arrival times in some cases exceeding 20 minutes. So you want your fire department there to begin to provide aid, determine whether resources are needed to provide something. In terms of why we can't have more paramedics, keep in mind that when the ambulance arrives on scene, we are obligated, once we begin ALS care, to continue ALS care. Now, if the ambulance shows up with a paramedic, we're okay. We can turn care over to an equal or higher authority. But when 2 EMTs arrive and a paramedic has already began to provide ALS care, then we can't downgrade that patient. My paramedics will lose their license. We operate under strict guidelines from a physician in the area that allows our paramedics to give medications and so forth without calling and asking for permission. While we can't operate with more than one paramedic, right now we can hire as many paramedics as we want, but think about this, if I have a paramedic on a ladder truck, and the paramedic now has to ride to the hospital, the ladder truck's out of service. The ladder truck now may need to go to the hospital and pick up that paramedic. If I put a paramedic on the engine, I now lose a firefighter off the engine. So we can't continue to just staff paramedics because I need to be able to, one, retain personnel here for fire suppression, and secondly, how am I getting these paramedics back?
So the ladder truck becomes an Uber?
More or less.
Yeah. And historically, we have significant overlap of calls. So, our paramedic might be in New Haven at Yale. A second call comes in. So if we have a paramedic on the ladder truck, that paramedic is out. What if we have a fire?
Yes.
So where are we going to get the personnel in order to be the first responders to that fire? So that's a major concern as far as duplication of calls, simultaneous calls that are occurring with 8 people per shift.
Something else to keep in mind as you look at how headquarters is staffed is the engine is the only apparatus with water on it. I'll say it again, the engine is the only apparatus with water on it. So if my engine is committed to a scene and a fire comes in, we are relying 100% on volunteers.
And mutual aid from?
That doesn't happen as that fast. Mutual aid is not being called for until our units begin to arrive on scene to determine that mutual aid is needed. And we're going to cover mutual aid in greater detail, so that's kind of a very abbreviated answer, but that'll be covered further. Any other questions before I move on?
No, let's move on and we'll build questions.
Mike, you look like you have a question.
I'm trying to hold them back.
So let's talk about incidents for a moment and what constitutes an incident. Every call, when I refer to, so from this point forward to incidents, calls, alarms, they're all the same thing. Unfortunately, it's terminology that's constant within the service, and I may be using a combination of the 3, but nonetheless, every call means that an apparatus is responding. If one call and I send 6 trucks to it, It's still 1 call, it's not 6 calls. Last year, in 2017, we had 19 building fires. We had 31 additional fires that occurred within buildings, where if we didn't arrive on scene, they would have become building fires. We're tasked with responding to motor vehicle accidents as well. Last year, we responded to nearly 300 of them, 3/4 of which had injuries. We're tasked with responding to the highway, and unlike the police department, the state police is able to provide police support on the highway. We're tasked with responding to the highway, so we're on the highway quite frequently. I often hear, well, how many fires does North Haven really have? We're saturated in this market with news. We could have a raging house fire that day, and you will not see it on the news because there's something else going on. So don't think because you don't see something occurring in the news, you don't see it in the newspaper, that there's not fires taking place. We've had 2 in the last week, only one of which was covered by the media. So these are the stats. We can't make these up. The stats that I'm providing to you today, they're part of NFIRS. It's the National Fire Incident Reporting System. So they have national guidelines for how incidents are categorized and how they're reported.
Paul, excuse me, and so how many of those fires, so you get about 1 a week, how many of those overlapped a medical call like you just described? You've got personnel down at the hospital.
So I don't have that stat for you, but I'd go as far as saying 1/3 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least 1/3 of them.
Right.
Keep in mind that over the last 5 years, we've had 4 deaths related to fires. That's remarkably high considering the town. And that we continue to see our call volume increase, and I'll cover that in further detail as well. Again, so how many alarms and what is an alarm? Over the last 5 years, we've seen a 7% increase in calls. During 2017, 4,384 alarms were responded to. It's not mostly medicals. We've cut out a majority of the non-urgent medical calls that we were responding to. So we're down to 63% of the calls are EMS. When I say we cut them out, we're no longer responding to incidents that we know a first responder is not going to make a difference with. Case in point, an ambulance is still needed to transport somebody who is under the influence of alcohol, or an ambulance is still needed to transport somebody who is having a behavioral emergency. We, as a fire department, were sending fire units to that at one time because an ambulance was being dispatched. A number of years ago, we cut all of those out because a call volume was just getting too high, where we sat down with our physician in the area who governs what calls we respond to, and he provided us permission that says you do not need to respond to these incidents any longer. We cannot cut any further calls. We're seeing the call volume continue to increase, and the calls that we're left responding to, we have to respond to. We've cut the fat, for lack of better words. During 2017, to Mr. Donnie's point, 1,158 incidents within 2017 occurred simultaneously. So 1/4 of the calls are occurring simultaneously. Meaning that, going back to that slide with the 3 apparatus from headquarters, one of those apparatus is not available. Or 2.
So that's at least 2. Could be more than 2.
Could be more.
Simultaneously.
Right. Something else to keep in mind is we don't have the ability to stack calls. What I mean by that is every incident that comes in for the fire department, we have to send somebody to. There's not a non-emergent incident. Case in point, and I've spoken with the police chief to ensure that I wasn't going to be upsetting the police department when I say things like this. A graffiti that's already taken place or a harassment complaint that's come in, it can wait until there's enough units available to respond. It's a completely different manner in which they respond to incidents in a fire department. Somebody who can't breathe, somebody who's having chest pains, somebody who is saying that my house is on fire, somebody who is saying, there's a motor vehicle accident. We need to be able to have units to respond right then and there. We can't prioritize calls and say, we'll get to this one when we get units available. It doesn't work that way in this service.
Chief, you're talking solely the paid firefighters.
No, sir. This is the entire department.
Well, that's my question. When does the volunteers go in?
So the volunteers, we've based on national response models that are out there, we restructured what the volunteers are responding to. Case in point is a residential fire alarm. National data points to the fact of majority of them being false alarms. So rather than mobilize the volunteers and send them to every single incident, we now are sending the volunteers to the emergent calls that are taking place. So active fires, active car fires, calls in which we need additional personnel there because we could be entering an atmosphere which is immediately dangerous to our life and health. 4,384 alarms is for the entire department. The volunteers respond to about 600 to 700 of those alarms.
How are they notified?
They're notified whether it be through pagers that they wear or through their cell phones.
Is
So
that
there's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
There's 1,200 fire calls, but yet we only bring out the volunteers 600 times? If you got
Correct.
30% of your fire calls, so you got 12 change in fire calls, they're only coming out half the time?
Correct. Yep.
Because it's just a small fire, you don't need them, or?
It's a couple of things. So it's also a matter of how it's reported. So if it's reported in such a way that that we don't need to mobilize 2 engines or 3 engines,
It's just
for
a small
example.
thing, so
yeah,
you don't
it's
need-
it's all it's the nation has looked at how we're sending apparatus to alarms and has decided that there's you take on a lot of risk when you start sending apparatus from all corners of the town on licensed sirens. So they've looked at that and they've said, let's minimize that level of risk to the community and let's send an engine and a truck. And if additional reports are received in a way there that it's a bigger incident than how we originally dispatched, then we start sending in the volunteers. Keep in mind, and I can cover this shortly, but we're using the volunteers quite extensively. The volunteers now, with the incidents that they're asked to respond to, are able to get out to half the calls. So thinking that we're going to shift these calls more to the volunteers is not a responsible way to look at this. 50% of the time they're not getting out now. And it's not their fault. And I'm going to cover that in greater detail in a moment, but that is not their fault.
Have you increased the volunteer population?
We have not. We have been unsuccessful in doing so, as most communities in the area have.
And the number now is?
Hovering around 37 to 42.
Are any volunteers paramedics?
I'm aware of only one volunteer who is a paramedic. I have a couple in training, but again, it's not something that is a responsible model to take on. I don't know of any departments in the area that have volunteers that are paramedics that respond to incidents. Because in order to start building that model of response, you need to ensure that resource is available all the time. And a volunteer who is a paramedic may not be available 5 days a week. So you can't start building that model around somebody who might be available 2 days a week.
They have full-time employment elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it, and that's what we got to keep in mind is the volunteers that we have in this town, don't mistake the fact that they give it 110%. They're doing the best they can. It's simply numbers. The numbers of the numbers on their roster today do not reflect what it did 10 years ago. There was one. Keep in mind, this department, this paid department, was built on the fact that we were intended to supplement the volunteers because there were over 100 of them at that time, and there are 100 of them that are active. We're down to 35 to 45 any given month that are active, and of those, they have full-time jobs. They have 2 or 3 jobs. Dual income families, people that are trying to make ends meet, kids that are busier than ever. Believe me, I know that. That's why the calls that they're dispatched to now, they have a hard time getting out to half of them.
It just surprises me that we don't send them out all the time.
We did at one time, and let's put it this way: we started sending volunteers to more incidents because the volunteers are separated into 3 different districts. Headquarters goes to everything. The volunteers are district-based. In order to try to get enough firefighters on scene, we were sending 2 different districts to try to get at least 1 engine assembled. And the volunteers had a very hard time and asked us to revert back because they were losing. They're held to a certain percentage of incidents they have to respond to. It's a performance measure that we have to incur on them in order to make sure that we're not investing money into their training, into their equipment and so forth, and we're not getting anything out of it, no return. So we're required that they respond to 25% of those incidents. When we start adding those incidents up, it starts hurting their ability to be able to maintain the level in which they have to respond. Some of these next slides, they're pretty self-explanatory. They cover where incidents occur. You know, I often hear that North Haven is a bedroom community from people that don't know the town. That's not the case at all. Only half of the incidents that we respond to are even occurring in residential, homes. And of those residential, a lot of them are taking place in our senior housing and our apartments. They're termed as residential. More than almost half of our calls are occurring elsewhere in town. What kind of incidents do we respond to? Just as a refresher, these are the variety of incidents we respond to. Now, if you take a look at those, really none of those we can stack. Any incident that comes in that's of that nature, we need to be able to respond to. You need to have somebody available right then and there to go, with the exception perhaps of public service calls, which are very few and far in between. When do the incidents occur? You can see that we begin to get quite busy early morning, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and we carry that right through to nearly midnight. There's a peak there for sure during daytime hours. And traditionally, keep in mind, this is when I struggle to maintain enough volunteers to respond to incidents, is during the daytime, because they all have full-time jobs. Which days are busier? Nearly every day is as busy as one another. Sundays, I guess you can look at as a little slower, but not a whole lot. Every day is as busy as the next. Our call volume. So we've been trending our call volume since the career department was organized, and our call volume right now is creeping back up. You can see in 2010 where that sharp decline accounted for the fluff in the calls I was referring to earlier that we no longer are responding to. That's the reason that we try to cut those out, is because we started to see our alarms increasing so much that we had to cut something. Our call volume now is getting back up to that point, and there's nothing left to cut.
Why is the call volume increasing? I mean, the population of the town hasn't dramatically increased over the last 10 years, has it?
No, in fact, if you look at the census data, amazingly, the population has stayed nearly the same.
That's what I would have thought.
Yeah, but what's changing is the demographics in the buildings that are in town. And I have that in a minute to kind of show you where a lot of our calls are occurring. And some of the businesses that we're bringing to town are significantly impacting our call volume. Urgent care medical centers, there's 3 or 4 of them in town. That's impacting us. The medical center on Divine Street, that's impacting us. The senior housing, what we know about seniors, we know that they are the highest drivers of EMS calls. That's impacting us. It's a lot of, not so much the number of residents as much as it is the businesses we're bringing into town.
Right.
So on that, it's almost like I knew you were going to ask that question. Divine Street alone in 2016, 185 incidents came out of that complex, 190 in 2017.
So is that the medical center, the walk-in medical center?
That is the entire, when I look at that is the entire Divine Street. So it could be 4, 6, or 8 Divine Street, because they're all more or less intertwined with one another, depending on what site you go to, depending on what level of service they provide. And that site is not yet fully developed. There's still more development to take place. From my understanding, there's 2 more floors to be developed on number 8.
Okay, so that's just not you responding to calls for people at the walk-in medical center. It's for any of the buildings over there.
It's for any of the buildings. The walk-in medical
Right.
center is a leading contributor to that, though.
Really?
Because people don't, the average consumer does not recognize that Yale New Haven Hospital, that I can't get the same level of care I can in an urgent care center that I can in the ED. And even if they do recognize that, they say, well, let me go to the urgent care center first and see what they say. And then you get to the point where you arrive and you're having a full-blown cardiac event or a full-blown respiratory event. And now an ambulance needs to be called, and with that, the fire department is called as well.
And keep in mind, the epicenter there over at Yale just most recently implemented a cardiac and a pulmonary department that was not there when they first came in.
Right.
So that enhanced calls as well.
Yeah.
201 Clintonville Road, when that site was last fully occupied, it contributed 150 incidents to our call volume. As that site begins to develop and it's going to be larger than it was, I see our call volume increasing. We've added 500 residential building units to the south end of town in the Montelise area, and that's going to have an impact on us. The Pratt Whitney site, the entire complex We don't yet know how many calls may come out of there. As a point of reference, I looked at Medtronic, which is another large manufacturing facility with a good number of employees. We respond there 40 to 60 times a year. So at least looking at a comparison standpoint, we don't know yet what to expect, but we can at least expect some additional call volume out of there. So since our last workshop, I don't want this to appear like it's all bad news.
Too late.
Yeah, thanks. We've made some substantial improvements since our last workshop. You know, right around the time of our last workshop, we started incorporating fire marshal fees as part of the permit process. And again, that covers not only the plan review, but the multiple trips to the site of our staff that need to take place in order to ensure that the building continues to be built in accordance to code. That could be anywhere from 3 to 10 trips. In addition to the plan review, we've taken in $211,000 in plan review fees. And out of that, I've been able to
I didn't see that on the record.
I didn't see it either.
Paul, just to jump in, because right now, as of 6 months, we got 86,000.
So this is not since this fiscal year. This is since we started doing the fees, since we started charging the fees.
How much on an annual basis are you projecting?
We're only at a year now, roughly.
So you're saying it's 86 in 6 months?
That's since July 1st through December 31st, 86,000.
So 175,000 straight lined out.
Which was revenue that was never received by the fire department or the town.
And the 107 expenses, that 6 months, or is that?
That's since it started. That's not 6 months.
Same time frame? What's the expense?
We were ahead of it. I don't have my disbursements.
Yeah, and that's what this is showing.
Are we much ahead of it, or are they breaking even with each other?
No, we're,
Okay.
I'd say 20-25% ahead of it.
Okay.
Well, according to us, we've collected 211 and we've paid out 107. So it looks like we're 100,000 ahead of it. So it shows that we're at least making some remarkable growth there in terms of revenue for the town. We've started to meet with a focus group. We've continued that since our last workshop as well to select members of the public that have reached out to us. And our commission has contacted members of the public, and we meet with members of the public as part of a strategic planning process where we begin to find out where the direction of the fire department should be moving forward, and we're continuing with that. I mentioned earlier the EMS billing that we're working on, and that is taking care of the Deputy Chief of Operations, which was funded this last budget. And then our CERT program. Our CERT program is not up and running yet. We've just received some state funding to start putting that together. We have about 50 citizens that are interested, and they've already met on 2 occasions, and we start class, looks like in about a month from now. And we'll have a number of members of the community more involved in CERT, and that is a minimal expense to the town.
I'm sorry, Paul, what is that program?
CERT is Community Emergency Response Teams. So it's if you look at disaster management and when natural or man-made disasters occur, what we find to be the most effective is members of the public that are trained in disaster response, trained in first aid, trained in recognition of hazards, things of that sort. And so we've started to train our residents, and with that, they'll be able to assist us during major incidents as well, whether it be staffing a warming center, staffing a shelter, or what have you.
Right.
Well, if I can just interject something, this is more for the Board of Finance. Bullet point number 2. I'm going to tell you why this is very important. Thursday, we had a Board of Directors meeting at CCM with mayors from all over the state. The City of Bridgeport came to us, and the City of Bridgeport has lost a Supreme Court case because they weren't in compliance with this general state statute. The Supreme Court overturned a decision at the appellate court to rule that Bridgeport was in violation. There were fatalities because of a building that wasn't inspected, and the Supreme Court has now ruled that Bridgeport has no case. Bridgeport came to us and asked us to file what's called an amicus, as representing all the municipalities across the state, but we were told by CCM's attorney that a Supreme Court case will never be overturned. So this bullet point number 2 has caught the attention of every chief elected official across the state. Stanford was sued a few years ago in a Christmas fire. Bridgeport, the largest city in Connecticut, just lost the case. So the chief and I have had a discussion. He's assembling how quickly we're getting into compliance, which is critically important. Unless that general statute changes, which the state, I found out after the CCM meeting, is never going to change, this is a key point. Municipalities are very vulnerable.
And Mike, you bring up an interesting point. All of us, come under the protection of
Immunity.
Immunity.
Yes.
In that Supreme Court case, they indicated that you are not immune. So fire department, leadership, Board of Fire Commissioners, finance committees, chief executive officers of the town are no longer covered under the liability of the town in the event that we were derelict in our duties. I was going to make a mention of that as well, item number 2. The fire inspector, since Jim has been on board, has identified significant violations that have been rectified and potential danger to our town, an additional cost to our fire department in the event we had to respond to whatever those circumstances were. And the chief could speak to some of the violations that were identified. But we've already made significant progress in rectifying those problems, in addition to generating the revenue that is coming in. And as Mike clearly indicated, we're certainly a bit ahead of the curve compared to Bridgeport and some of the other municipalities who are now saying that they need to hire a team of fire marshals to go out to inspect the buildings in their municipalities in order to be in compliance with the Supreme Court ruling. So it's a major issue that I think municipalities and boards and commissions, yours and ours alike, and certainly including Mike in the equation, have to contend with the Supreme Court decision. There's no question that that is a major issue that we're contending with, and I think the chief was right in bringing on board this non-employee fire marshal to begin the inspections of buildings that we have not had the personnel to be able to go out to inspect.
Chief, where do you think we are percentage-wise?
Yes, that's a great question. It's, as I've told First Selectman Frida, I need another year to really be able to give you that number. The reason for that is properties fall into an inspection interval of anywhere from 1 to 4 years. Your residentials fall in, your apartment complexes, your high-risk areas, they fall into every year. But then there's, let's say, a mercantile business every 3 years. We were only at this about a year right now. And the other difficulty with this was there's not a grand list you can go and look at somewhere that says what properties you need to inspect. You have to go to a number of different places to begin to grab that information, whether it be the assessor's office, whether it be the town clerk, whether it be the building department. What we have to inspect and what they have to inspect are two different things. So it took us a couple months to build that database, and we still find properties every once in a while that we realize aren't anywhere else accounted for. We've got to pull them into our system. To answer your question, being a year in and with a 4-year interval, I need 1 more year to really be able to figure out kind of where we are in terms of overall compliance.
Do you think you'll be at 100% within that?
I do not think we'll be at 100%, no. I expect we're going to be somewhere around 70 to 80%. The issue with this becomes when you look at the fact that we have some significant development that's going to be occurring pretty soon. And with that, this same staff that's tasked with going out and doing inspections on buildings are tasked with ensuring that buildings are being built to code. And that's not anything that happens very easily. I'm not going to throw contractors under the bus or anybody else, but what you often see happen is that there's shortcuts that are sometimes intentionally taken and sometimes mistakenly taken that require us to constantly have to be on site. I think the elephant in the room is Amazon. If Amazon is successful in building, that's going to tie up a lot of resources that we would normally be putting towards inspections now to make sure that that building is being built to code. And a couple others as well. It's not as simple as look at the prints and say, okay, build it to that. Every day, especially for a building like that, we're going to need to be on site and ensuring that.
Were there issues with the middle school?
Yes, there were. And because of public building, I'm not getting into detail, but I wouldn't say there were issues, but there were constant questions that came up that required interpretation of the plans or of the code or there were perhaps a cost-saving measure that was identified that then was determined, well, can we build it like this? And the problem is, you get a lot of GCs that sub it out to different contractors, and the contractors don't all talk to one another and communicate with one another. So there were some issues, there were minor issues, they've all been worked out. But yeah, that's a good example of our staff being tied up multiple times.
So you have all this data now captured in a system, so in the future, you could go back and you have records of what you did. It just took you time to figure out how to build it.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. Not only do we have the properties identified in terms of what needs to be inspected, but we have the properties then broken down. And where I go with that is case in point is, let's say that we know that we have 5,000 properties we need to inspect, but we know that we only have the staff to inspect 3,000 properties. Well, I want to know that the 3,000 properties then that we're inspecting are the most critical properties. And how do you develop that? You develop a formula where every time you go out and you do your inspection, you determine things like, is there a hydrant available? Is there sprinklers in the building? What's the occupancy of the building? Are there hazardous materials in the building? You start looking at all these different variables. So we've not only identified the buildings, but we've identified a risk formula as well, so that we know that as we move forward, we're going to be getting to the buildings that are the highest risk. And then we at least have a defense if we're ever brought before court and asked, why didn't you not get to an inspection of this building? We can show that it's because these other ones took priority.
Bridgeport told us, Paul, that their problem is they can't get access into many of the buildings either.
And that's a great point. It's not as easy as knocking on the door and saying we're here for an inspection. I don't get very intimately involved in this because I have so many other things to be doing, but I'm involved in it enough where I can tell you that this week alone, we're applying for 2 search warrants because the property owner's not letting us in. We're in court almost every other week, dealing with different property owners. And that's the things that take time. It's not the inspections, it's the follow-up, it's the access, it's the re-inspections that have to take place to ensure compliance, and it's meeting with attorneys who then get dragged into it. Town attorneys are busier now than ever with us. It's a long process.
So do you just show up, or do you give the businesses
We send
advance
letters.
notice?
So it's a combination of both. Most of the time, we send them a letter and we ask for an appointment. There are others that we don't quite need to do that with, but it also depends on what we're looking for. If we're acting on a complaint, we don't need to schedule an appointment.
I got one question about the CERT program.
Sure.
Okay, Chief, I don't know how involved the residents get, but is there a liability that the town can?
Good question. So there's no liability. And I say that because in order for the CERT team to start operating, they have to be activated. And they're activated through the emergency management of the town and then through the state of Connecticut. And when that system happens, they're covered under state and federal law. They're of no liability to the town. But that also limits how often we can use them. You don't want to be using them very often. There's specific parameters that fall in place.
You know, Jim, it was very encouraging to see how many residents in the town volunteered to participate in this program, because there are other municipalities that have had a great deal of difficulty recruiting residents to participate. So we're thrilled with the numbers that have already voiced an interest in participating. And as the chief indicated, they've already had a couple of meetings. And certainly if the residents that are listening to this meeting, if they would like to participate in this, certainly contact the chief's office, because as we all know, people come on, people go off, it's a flow. So it's just really encouraging to see that.
Good, thanks for
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Chief.
So transition now into the specific budget line increases that were requested. Now that we've got at least a refresher down and the service model that we perform for the community at least has been identified. So budget line increases for this next budget year, I've asked for a $27,000 increase in building maintenance. This is entirely due to the fact that we're looking to bring fiber network connectivity into the 3 volunteer stations. What that's going to allow for us is the integration of door access systems with door access control being centered on one location. It's going to take us away from our reliance on third-party vendors for internet and phone, which have proven to be unreliable at times, especially during inclement weather. integration into the town phone systems, so that when we have the stations that are staffed and are on standby, let's say, receive a call, we can right away transfer the call rather than having them hang up and dial another number. There's a lot of things that bringing those stations onto fiber provide for us, one of which is all the apparatus function with iPads in the apparatus that are not only receiving the call information as it's taking place from dispatch, but it has crucial information on it that allows the responding firefighters to know what's taking place at that incident, who's responding, and other information about the property. Once you leave the building, they're hooked up to Verizon, but in the building, we struggle to maintain any kind of Wi-Fi system or any kind of internet system. And the IT department has said that these are the last town buildings that don't have fiber in them, and they really should have fiber in them. It's $750 a month. 3 stations, it comes out to $27,000. The vehicle maintenance line have asked for a $20,000 increase. That is because of our overall aging fleet and the increased cost for parts. As your apparatus begins to age, the cost for the parts become more and more. We need to maintain 7 engines, 2 ladders, and 4 administration vehicles. And we're seeing that line is continuing to become more costly as we're seeing our apparatus continue to age.
I'd like to make one point regarding the door access system. We've had a couple of break-ins into our fire stations over the last period of time, and I think the door access system will help to prevent a lot of that. I mean, we still have the old key system, and as you know, there's so many people that have keys to these buildings, and if they're lost or whatever it might be, in addition to people just breaking in. So I think it's going to be critically important to make sure that we have the door access system in order to identify who's coming in and out of the building and when they do so. All of our places of business have that, and I think it's important for the fire department to have it as well.
Aren't the buildings occupied by someone 24 hours?
The volunteer stations are not, though.
Oh.
No.
Just Central Station.
Technology line, I'm looking for an increase of $10,000. That is for software and equipment enhancements that we're looking to move forward with. Notification of alarms can be done through cell phones now, but there's costs attributed to that, as well as putting out our radio channels over the internet so that, let's say, I have volunteers who are in the area that are listening to a call and determining if they really want to leave their obligation they're currently at. They can start listening. They can determine if the incident is going in a direction that would necessitate their response, and they can start leaving. You get beyond these town borders, and the radios really don't start working any longer for these simple pagers that they carry. So there's programs that we're looking to buy that will help to be able to make that that much easier. Another example would be we're looking to make improvements with the GIS mapping. So when they're responding to calls and they have the call up on their iPad, let's say we pull into a condo complex. Unfortunately, a lot of the condo complexes and apartment complexes are not very well numbered in terms of the numbers of the units. When you pull into a condo complex and you're going to building 12 and the sign's covered, there's a car parked in front of it, the sign's knocked down, you don't know where building 12 is. Well, you can take a GIS overlay and you can actually start identifying in the complex itself where building 12, 14, 1, 2, so that when you take a left-hand turn, you've committed to that left-hand turn and now you know that you're going in the right direction. But there's all costs to having to do that. So that's what the reason for that line increase. The overtime line. I'm going to ask the chairman to pass out some information. This is all set up right now in a particular order, so if you would kindly just stay with me as I go through it with you. The overtime line, I know, is an item of contention with this board on a regular basis. I'm looking to be as transparent now as anybody has ever been with this board in terms of the overtime line, so that we can at least try to be on the same page. I'm once again proposing that we separate the overtime line from a contractual replacement line. I tried doing this 2 years ago. I'm trying again to do it now so that we can all better understand how this is set up.
So Chief, while he's passing those out, so differentiate for me what you call overtime and contractual replacement.
Sure. So overtime line is going to be just that. It's overtime because of incidents that are occurring, weather emergencies that are occurring, callbacks that are having to take place to cover multiple alarms, whereas contractual staffing is you have any notes for me?
Oh, sorry about that.
Sorry. Contractual staffing is,
Sorry,
I want to
Chief.
make sure I have the same as them.
Yeah.
Contractual staffing is just that. It's covering employees who are out on one of those apparatus, on that 8 shift, covering them while they're out so that we can get that backfilled.
So there's 2 types of overtime.
There's 2 types of overtime. The first page I provided for you is the vacation schedule, 2018. That's the heading on top. I like to keep this amongst the board only. This shows the number of vacation days for career staff, how many they are each obligated contractually to receive. Pay only attention to the name and to the number. The name is not even that important, but more or less a number of names that receive how many vacation days. As my career staff begins to become more senior, these numbers will of course change, they'll increase. But you can see that of the career staff, these are the number of vacation days that they're contractually entitled to. The next page I'd like you to look at is a calendar that has a bunch of red checks on it. And it starts on the top left-hand corner, July of 2017. This is not our accounting system, believe me, it is much more complex than this, okay? We keep track of everything on a computer system, on a program. But this is a easy way of understanding how overtime is scheduled and how it is therefore backfilled for contractual time off. You can see I have for you the fiscal year in front. So the first set of documents is July 17 through December of 17. And each one of those vacations are vacation time off, where I have to backfill that shift in order to fill that 8 shifts, the 8 firefighters assigned to the shift. You can see there's divisions, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and there's 8 names assigned to the division. When one of those names are not there, we need to backfill that shift in order to maintain that 8-man staffing. VD is vacation day, VN is vacation night, VT is the entire 24-hour tour off. This will line up with the first page I gave you that shows a number of vacation days each employee is entitled to. I often hear about this time of year, how the overtime line is already so much spent. Yes?
Just give me 1 second, Chief.
Yep.
So just as an example, if I was in the first division and I needed a day off, whether it be night, day, or the full 24 hours, right?
Yep.
You can't swap with someone else? I mean, so you can't say, hey, Tim, Pat needs Tuesday off. Why don't you work for him Tuesday, he works Wednesday? Why is there overtime every time somebody is off?
So the swaps are allowed, but the employees are entitled to the vacation days from the first document that I handed out to you. So they're going to take those vacation days in that period, that period of time. So the swaps are still allowed. The swaps won't be reflected on this. This is just for vacations.
But I guess maybe if I need to rephrase my question, if Mr. Ober takes a day off, you're saying I have to fill his spot, maybe from someone from Division 2 who's already working a shift? Where does the overtime come in there?
So the shifts, so the divisions 1, 2, 3, and 4, every 4 days they work a 24-hour shift.
Right.
If in Division 1, let's look at the 3rd of July as an example. So
Okay.
on July 3rd, Division 1, there were 3 employees that took a 24-hour period off.
Right.
And, I'm sorry, there were 4, because the Ps are personal days, they're also contractual. So there were 4 employees who took the entire 24-hour period off. I now need to take an employee from either Division 2, 3, or 4 and fill those 4 spots. That is contractual replacement overtime. That is contractual time off that they're taking, that they're allowed to take, that I now need to fill those shifts. If I didn't fill the shifts, we were down to a shift of 4.
But I guess to my question, if someone from Division 2 fills one of those 4 spots, are they also working their regular shift, and is that why there's overtime?
Yeah, correct. Right, because they still have to come to work. Division 2 will come to work on the 4th of July.
So what's a normal weekly shift for a firefighter in town?
So it's easier to describe it in increments of 4. They do 24 hours on, 72 hours off, and then repeat that cycle over and over again. It averages to 42 hours a week.
So I guess if someone picks up a shift and they're doing more than 24/72, then they
get overtime.
take it overtime.
And they're getting overtime because of contractual time off, which I'm looking to have reflected in their contractual replacement line. And I'm going to show you a further calculation in a second to kind of show you how we get to that number.
But if you didn't allow 4 people to take the same day that are in the same division, you would, and one person's taking a personal day,
Right.
vacation day, technically, worst case scenario, you're down a man on a shift, you're down to 7, and there's no overtime, because you wouldn't backfill it with anybody.
So if you're saying on July 3rd, there were 4 out and I only filled it,
If you only told one person to take it out.
So if you're only
If you
giving
didn't let
permission,
4
you're only
people-
giving permission for one.
Only
So the
giving
other 3 are, you're not giving permission to
Yep,
get
one's gotta
that.
take Saturday, one takes Sunday, one takes
So-
Monday, one takes Tuesday, whatever.
That restriction's already in place. If you look,
Okay.
there is no period of time that more than 3 employees are out on vacation. You will not find that
I mean,
anywhere
just
on-
because you had 4 from one division.
Right.
If they were scattered over all 4 divisions, I wouldn't, but to get 4 guys off in the same division on the same day would seem to be,
Contractually, it's allowed. They're allowed to take 3 per shift, and then they're allowed to take personal days on top of that. Understand, though, that at the end of the year, it wouldn't make a difference.
well,
Because
I think
you're still-
Rich's question is, can you run a 7-man shift?
Right.
well,
think-
I'm sure there's occasion where, I'm sure the 7-man shift is one thing, I think that's something that can be discussed. But I just think it seems to exacerbate the problem is when you have, I don't have a problem with 4 guys taking the same day off. I have a problem with 4 guys in the same division.
That's always going to be 4 guys in the same division.
It's always going to be 4 guys in the same division.
They can plan their shift out for the next year. The same 4 guys are working the same days for the next year.
I missed that point. I think,
Yeah.
because I think
So-
Rich is questioning, because you had 4 guys in the third, we had 4 people in overtime. I think what he's asking is, and maybe what I'm asking is,
See, no, I know you.
what if you said, listen, we can only have 2 guys per shift off? That's it. Well, what is the department rules on that?
Department rules are 3 per shift
Okay.
on vacation.
Right.
And 2 on personal. And the personal days are not
Per
accrued.
division? So they could have 5 people off?
Correct.
So you can pretty much have an entire shift that you have to bring in.
Correct.
Is that the department rule or is that under the collective bargaining?
It's contractual.
Oh, it's contractual.
That's the difference, Rich.
Right. When I say department, I'm
contractual.
saying contractual. This
Yeah,
is
okay.
not, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it still wouldn't change the end of year number, because you're still looking at that much overtime, and I'll cover that in a second, because I'll
Okay.
show you the next page.
Yes,
okay?
keep going.
But let's
I don't want to
just-
stop you in midstream.
But let's just look at, because at this time of year, I start hearing about how the overtime line is already so much spent, and oh my God, it's already so much spent. Look at July 17 to December 2017, and you can start to see all the vacation days that have already been taken. Now moving to the next 6 months of this fiscal year, which is the larger document that's partially folded for you, that shows you now January through July, and you'll see there's not that many red days marked, because there's not that much more vacation time.
This is planned, this is not actual. 'cause
This is
up-
planned.
It's
Right.
planned, so everyone's filled in and took their max and.
No, the
they're
vacation
still-
days are not in yet for the entire year.
Okay.
But what you typically see is, as with any employment staff, they're looking to take the summer months off when they're staying with their children, and December off to stay home around Christmas time. We're through those months already.
Is there a cutoff day where you actually, they have to pick it by
No,
the
sir.
year?
No,
No?
How many personal days do they get a year?
2. 2 shifts, which equals 1 day.
So, first page on the first handout, you guys have 30 days off a year. Does the police have the same amount?
I don't know.
So there are different contracts?
Yes.
Okay,
It's
so-
all negotiated, Jim.
So, it sounds to me your problem stems from the contract more so than anything else. So why couldn't you implement at the next negotiation a new hire procedure for reducing the volume of time off?
Yeah, that would be on the town to propose that. This is where I'm left having to budget for what the contract allows for, and this is what the contract allows for.
Understood.
Right.
But if looking down the road, I mean, it sounds, you have a serious attendance problem now that eats up your OT. You should start looking down the road and say, how can I fix this? And one of the ways I would think would be any new, contractually grandfather everybody in that's working. And beyond that, start looking at reducing this.
And to your point, Mr. Leonis, if you look at the next page, it'll begin to kind of drive the numbers home. The next page is kind of my notes, if you will, in terms of calculations. So it starts off with contractual replacement staffing line calculations, and then it breaks down what the overall number of vacation days are, personal days. I average the number of sick days per employee. I look at 2 long-term workers' comp injuries. Last fiscal year alone, I had somebody out the entire year. So I look at 2 long-term workers' comp injuries at 4 months. I look at military leave. I have a military member of the military who is deployed at times. I have to budget for that. And I look at training leave. I come up with a contractual replacement overtime line of $783,000. And that's how that calculation comes around.
So, would it make more sense to say what we're gonna do is put 9 guys on shift, and we're not gonna call in, if one person takes that day off, well, we're not gonna fill that spot. So I guess in my simple math, that tells me you're paying straight time for that person, right? Now you're paying, obviously, their full fare the whole year for 4 guys, I understand that. And maybe it's tricky to time it. But I guess on a one-day situation, if you look at just one day, I guess you save the overtime.
Right, when you look at the number of apparatus that we staff right now, it's 3 apparatus, go
Yeah.
back to that, one of the first slides. We need those 8 staff to cover those 3 apparatus. If we were looking to maintain 3 apparatus responding to incidents, then we could look at perhaps adding to the staff to cut down on that man-for-man replacement, but that would continue to staff 3 apparatus only.
Right.
Jim, getting back to your point, you're exactly correct, because when you look at the first graph of persons that have the greatest number of vacation days, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of those people have the greatest number. If the town had a retirement program where they would be able to say, okay, let's give some of these folks an opportunity to retire, if in fact we had the monies to do that, and Mike and I have had this discussion over lunch most recently, we would be able to certainly give the opportunity to some of these people, or all of these people, and some of them might choose to retire, and then we could bring some new people on board with certainly a lesser number of vacation days under the collective bargaining contract, of which we're in the process of that discussion now.
Correct.
Right. So I think that's something that absolutely, you're right on target with that. Absolutely.
When they retire, if they haven't used all of their vacation time, do they get paid for it?
There's a maximum number of days.
It doesn't come out of the FD budget, it comes out of elsewhere in town.
Some other source.
Yeah, there's a max.
See, crew
Number of
reserve time,
days.
isn't
Yeah.
the crew reserve counted?
So shifting gears, that would be contractual replacement staffing in those calculations I provided to you. Looking at overtime, overtime can be calculated at approximately $6,200 a year. Overtime would be incidents of a severe blizzard, ice storm, a hurricane that's coming. We get gross days in July and August where the heat index is beyond something that I can have people outdoors for any significant length of time for. We don't do it often, but I can look at times where we have to do that. Nonetheless, the overtime line is just that. It's additional staff being brought on to cover additional incidents or to cover an unforeseen circumstance. That would be overtime. The overtime line, I provide those calculations for you as well. Call back at roughly 12 times a year, 12 personnel at 4 hours, and each of those have a calculation.
Chief, interesting, you didn't mention fires just now. So of the roughly 51 or 2 fires a year, if the fire's big enough, we call on our own professional staff first before mutual aid, is that?
Yeah, so that's, when I refer to callback, that's what that is.
That's what that
is.
That's, yeah, and that's exactly what that is. It's callback in terms of covering additional alarms that are
Right.
coming in while we're obligated, and it's callback in terms of bringing career staff on to help and
Right.
respond to the scene. Yeah.
Paul, can you share with the Board of Finance our discussion, if we replicated the town's retirement program from years ago, how many people would leave, do you think would accept it?
Yeah, so this is all hypothetical, but I was employed by the town a number of years ago when this plan was put in place, and I believe the number was 12 to 15 town employees had to take advantage of it. I would tend to think that I would have 3 to 4 that would at least consider the package if it mirrored what it was prior.
Right. Well, the package was put into place 12, 15 years ago. We have it, Ed's got it. But these firefighters who would be interested are all at the higher levels of vacation time, right?
Right, when you look at, if we were to have 4 firefighters retire that had the max number of vacation days, you're looking at $100,000 in savings in overtime. Because go back to that contractual replacement line calculation numbers, you would take out 120 days from that.
When you look on this list, the newest firefighter that just came on board has 4 days. The seniors have 30 days. And we have 2, 4, 6, 7 of those. And then you have some others that are at 24, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13,
Pat, I saw the 4, I assume that was a
16 at 24.
I assume that was a partial year, so we can't start them at 4 days for a whole year, right?
Yeah, they start at 6.
Do they really? Yeah.
Yeah. So Tim, it's a significant reduction.
Right.
So and I think, your point is well taken, Mike. And if we're able to implement that program and the town is able to underwrite that cost, and when you look at the savings, that will certainly assist in the underwriting of the cost of the retirements.
I bring all this up to the board to be abundantly transparent with what I'm left having to budget for. And these calculations show that. The contractual replacement staffing is what it is, and this is what I need to budget for. The overtime line is just that. It's additional incidents, and on that is incident callback. Prolonged incidents, and staff are asked to cover additional calls. And I put in a projection for how many times we expect that to occur in a given year based on prior year data.
Before I let you keep going with your proposal, which I do want to, because I don't want to keep getting bogged down with little things, but if the town did go in that direction, what are the age of those people with the 30 days? I mean, are we talking about people that are at retirement age or just about at retirement age?
Yes. Yeah, you can't, it's very hard to get that number of vacation days without being of an age where you can retire there shortly after.
Okay.
Yeah.
One other thing on this list is jury military, where you're budgeting 77,000.
Right, and you can see my calculation there. It's mostly military, but there's contractual.
I don't understand why we pay military if they're on military leave.
I have to cover the shift.
Oh, just to cover the shift.
Just to cover the shift.
But keep in mind, Rich, we get reimbursed from the government, but that doesn't come into our budget. So we would need to hire, for that shift. But then we get the reimbursement as we do under workers' comp or whatever it might be, that goes back to the town.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at my calculations between estimating for long-term workers' comp injuries and estimating for military leave, there's $100,000 coming back elsewhere in the budget for that, but it doesn't reflect in my budget. I still need to cover for the contractual replacement for that employee.
If you remember, last year, we went through that exercise, and what the chief is suggesting for this proposed budget is almost exactly the dollar value that we had to request from the special town meeting to underwrite the cost of the deficit of the budget, of the overtime.
Quickly, as I've already covered most of these items, the only thing further to say under contractual replacement staffing is we do staff our shift at 8 firefighters. We're required to staff it at 7 from 1996, when our call volume was not what it was now and when we had over 100 volunteers. So the fire commission Michael Frieda and myself, we sat down, we looked at a variety of different data points and came to the decision that we needed to start staffing to 8 firefighters, which is why that decision was made. We're looking at making sure we have enough firefighters responding to the scene.
Okay.
And at that point, everybody counts. No deficiencies. I've got to start covering some of the deficiencies that we know that we have right now. Again, anything that is predictable is preventable. And I'm going to present some deficiencies that are occurring today that therefore means that I have to begin to prepare for how to mitigate those. We're looking at our staffing and our inability to respond to incidents. There are incidents occurring that I have no units available to send. We're looking at not having the appropriate resources available to send, which in this case is referring to paramedics, or in some cases an engine, which has water on it. And we're looking at a decrease in volunteer firefighters. It's stabilized right now, but we're still looking at an overall decrease from what it once was. Our apparatus, we are in the process of replacing a ladder truck, but the overall age of the fleet continues to age. If we look at our staffing levels, okay, you can see that the career staff has remained virtually the same since 1974. There was a slight increase, again, 4 personnel were added, 1 per shift in 2009, 2010, when we started to provide paramedic service. In that period of time, the volunteer firefighters have been on the decline, and that again is no fault of their own, that is just current economics in today's age.
I thought, Chief, putting the training center in was going to help.
Yeah, and so that training center is not yet complete. We're still very much in a design phase of that with the tech school is building that for us. My intention with that would be to attract additional volunteers. I don't think we're going to get back to the 60 or so that we're short, but it is primarily to retain the volunteers that we have. That is what I'm looking to do. But that training center is being designed this academic year. I hope to have site plan work done in the summertime and actually start having it built next year.
Great, good news.
So recruitment of volunteer firefighters, we participate in national and Connecticut recruitment drives. We're constantly looking for more opportunities in which we can continue to increase the number of volunteers that we have. Right now, we're looking at 15. Again, these numbers change weekly in some regards. So at the last accurate count, there were 15 firefighters in a roster at West Ridge, 33% of which were non-residents. There were 18 in a roster at Monteluce, and there were 18 in a roster at Northeast. So that comes out to 51 in a roster, 37 of which are qualified. The difference of the 37 and 51 are those who are relatively new, who are going to training and trying to become credentialed to become a full-fledged member and therefore able to respond to all incidents. So we have 51 in a roster as of this count, and we had at one time 105. So again, it is by no means the fact that they're doing anything wrong or they're not as committed or dedicated as they once were. It just comes down to the overall numbers of which they have available. We've made infrastructural improvements to their stations. We've bought them apparatus. We've done a relatively good job of ensuring that we keep them around and we keep them interested. We're looking at the training center now to keep them involved as well. There's banners hanging at each of the fire stations. We've established a recruitment hotline so that anybody who's interested in becoming a volunteer calls and is pushed towards a recruitment hotline. It is monitored and it is then responded to by another volunteer. I think there's a lot of benefit to another volunteer speaking to a prospective volunteer in terms of what to be expected and what the next steps are. We were allowing non-residents to become volunteer firefighters. At a recent commission meeting, that was decided that we're going to close the borders more or less. It's gone open and closed over the years. Most recently it's been closed. And the reason for that is when you look at the number of non-residents that we had as volunteers, it starts to impact our response times. When you start having volunteers responding from outside of the town, trying to get to the station, while your roster may reflect a healthy roster, it's not showing the fact that it's taking longer for the apparatus to get out. So with some exception, the rosters, the borders are closed. There are some variables in there. for example, the West Ridge section of town. There can be somebody who lives in Spring Glen portion of Hamden who is much closer to the fire station than somebody who lives way up on the Blue Hill section of town. So there's obviously some rationale being taken there. But there was a period of time that we were accepting people from Upper New Haven, and it's just not working out.
And we have some volunteers that work in town and live out of town, and their job allows them access during the day, if you will, to participate in the event there's an emergency. So the commission has made special exceptions for those individuals.
So they don't have to be at the firehouse when they're on duty?
They're never almost never at the firehouse.
Oh, they're
No, almost never.
residents.
So their pager goes off, and wherever they are, they have to go to the firehouse, get on the apparatus, and then respond to the fire or emergency.
We often refer to the National Fire Protection Agency Association. It's NFPA. In this reference here, it's going to be 1710. It is the governing national standard that discusses and references how many firefighters are needed on scene to adequately perform firefighting duties. This is the same standard, NFPA, that's referenced in a House bill that was recently passed. We're going to cover in a minute. So it is a nationally recognized standard. With that, it calls for 4 firefighters to arrive on scene within 5 minutes, 90% of the time, in order to begin to perform fire suppression operations. It then calls for 14 to 15 firefighters to arrive on scene in what's called a full alarm assignment 90% of the time. Now it's 14 to 15 firefighters for a single family home. That is a small home that pretty much accounts for most of the homes in North Haven. That is not covering your warehouses, your mercantile establishments, your large apartment complexes and things of that sort, your condominium complexes. That is 14 to 15 firefighters for a house fire. We have 8 on duty. We then rely solely on the volunteers to make up that number. We have 8 on duty, and we hope that all 8 are available when that fire comes in. There was a time that we were meeting that. There was a time that 14 to 15 firefighters on scene was not an issue. The volunteers were able to, with a roster of 35 on each of the 3 companies, they were fully able to make sure that there was 6 to 12 firefighters responding, volunteers responding from the volunteer houses. We're not seeing that as being the case, particularly during the day right now. So we need to start to plan for ensure we have enough firefighters on scene that can perform the job safely and adequately. Again, we had 19 building fires last year. So it's not like we don't have fires that are occurring. This is a town that does have a significant fire occurrence and fire risk because of some of the occupancies that are within town.
Now, we do depend on mutual aid, and I think Rich mentioned mutual aid earlier. There's no question about the fact that our neighbors are very generous in assisting us to respond. It's difficult for us, if not almost impossible for us, to assist them. Because if they requested us to assist them, we then, out of those 3 pieces of apparatus that we have available on any shift, would be short 1. So how do we perform the duties in our town?
Well, the town does provide mutual aid.
We absolutely do.
Assist surrounding towns very heavily sometimes with police. So it's not just fire. I mean, we respond, police, especially to North Branford, Northford.
100%.
Hamden, State. We do respond. We help our neighbors out as well as they helping us out. Just that we're more capable of helping them with police than we are with fire. They're more capable of helping us with fire, than
police.
Probably police.
Correct.
So, I mean, it's a
give and
two-way
take.
street.
It's a give and take.
So I don't mind asking for help when we need help in an area where we, for whatever reason, may need it at that time.
And we do ask, Rich. Obviously, again, there's a response time because, as the chief indicated, we respond, we assess, we request, then they need to respond. And in a fire, and Chief, please articulate what the time frame is from a fire starting until every minute or 2 it spreads, doubles.
And I understand that, but I also, it's my understanding that you're on a fire. You have sufficient manpower at the fire, for example. We still use mutual aid, and they pre-position equipment closer to our borders so that the response time isn't as large, because they understand there may be a need for them.
If they're,
And the same thing that we've done, an aspect with them with police, we will sometimes cover an area of patrol for them because they have an incident, they're tying up all their units.
correct.
Just like when there's an accident, the entire team gets assembled. So what's good is that most of our surrounding communities understand that we all can't staff and have resources for every possible event,
100%.
and we share those things.
100%.
Only thing I was trying to get at. So I
Good point.
understand, mutual aid is an important factor.
Sure,
for
and on
fire for us.
that, in 2015, when we're looking at our historical response to fire incidents, I incorporated policies that actually started to require mutual aid engine from a surrounding town, depending on where it was in town, to respond to the scene. And that was ensuring that we received that second engine to respond. Remember, headquarters has the one engine with water on it. You hope that one engine's available. But that one engine that's responding needs to know there's a second engine coming. They work in teams when they arrive on scene. Knowing there's a second engine coming, you can make significant operational decisions versus not knowing if they're not coming and not knowing what to do next in terms of establishing a water supply and things of that nature. So we need to know that there's enough apparatus that are responding so that we can do what we have to do. We looked at the average response by volunteers for each company. During the daytime, the volunteers, again, this is all three, are each of them are able to provide, unfortunately, 0 at times to 2 firefighters during the day. During the evening, it picks up 4 to 10, and then overnight, 4 to 8. This is per company. So 50% of the time, there is no response. So we need to start to look at how we can ensure that we have resources available to respond at all times. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of different scenarios where you can see just how easily that happens. Where I begin to become concerned with mutual aid is our ability to reciprocate. And we have mechanisms set up in place where we can have mutual aid for the prolonged incidents because we can arrive on scene, we can assess what's going on, we know we're going to be there a while. That's different. Mutual aid is then, policies are written to be able to do that and cover that. Surge is different. Surge is going to be when we have multiple calls occurring. We don't expect there to be that many calls in that short period of time. And now we have to start to call mutual aid, and that's where it becomes difficult. When you look at mutual aid and we're asked to reciprocate that mutual aid, it becomes a calculated risk in terms of what to send in our town. The volunteer engine are getting out half the time. Another town does not want to call an engine and wait to see if we can send somebody. They're calling an engine, want to know we have an engine going. So I'm sending engine 1 to another town, and I'm putting all 3 companies on standby, all 3 volunteer stations on standby, so that we can assemble another engine available. It becomes hard when I have only the one engine available to reciprocate with, knowing that I need it for my own calls as well. 3 apparatus that are staffed very quickly become exhausted with our current call volume that we have here. Our medical response, again, remember that we provide EMS response multiple times each day. All headquarters units, all 3 apparatus are responding to separate medical incidents. On average, we're unable to respond to 1 to 2 incidents per week, meaning that the ambulance, and this is where we're, in essence, playing the odds, for lack of better words. If you look at the fact that 60% of our calls are medical, the 1 to 2 incidents a week that we're missing right now are predominantly medical calls. There's going to come a point in time where there's going to be a fire call coming in, and I'm not going to have a whole lot to send. I'm going to tone out the volunteers. I'm going to hope that they have somebody available. But again, during the day, they've made it very clear they have very limited resources available.
Does that mean you don't show up at all?
That's correct.
Well, then what happens? Do
If
they
it's
call
a-
someone else?
Yeah, well, mutual aid.
Yeah.
We'd have to, we'd have to call mutual
Right.
aid.
Okay.
We're gonna call mutual aid, but there's
I
gonna be
see.
a significant delay in that arrival.
Yes, of course.
Pat, we had an experience similar to that most recently, and we've all read about it, where we had a major house fire in town, and we received 5 911 calls simultaneously. All 8 of our personnel were at the fire. We called mutual aid, but in the meantime, we were unable to respond to 5 911 calls. I mean, that's unconscionable. And as a commission and as a department, it's a major issue for us. But getting to Rich's point, we can't be all things to all people all the time. There's, sometimes there's that perfect storm, and that was one of them. And we recognize that. But unfortunately, I think from our point of view, we've got a responsibility. When someone dials 911, they're expecting the fact that someone from our department is going to show up. What we need to do the best we possibly can do with the resources and finances that we have. We clearly understand that, Rich.
I might have missed this, but do we always send the pumper? What do we send? Does the pumper always go?
To a fire?
Yeah, for this aid, for the out-of-town aid.
Most of the time, a neighboring department is requesting an engine to the scene, because the engine is the most equipped for fire suppression. There are times that the ladder truck is requested, in which case we'd send both the ladder truck and the engine.
Oh, so the area town will request what they need?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
If it's a big fire, a tall building, they're going to need a ladder truck.
Yes.
So our typical response is to bring some perspective in terms of how easy it is to run slim on resources. 91, Route 15, we have to send 2 apparatus to the highway. The reason for it being...
Safety.
The
Block
rescue.
traffic.
The rescue is treating the
100%.
patients. The engine or the truck, they're also going to treat patients, but that apparatus is positioned in such a way as you see depicted there, where it's protecting the scene. And unfortunately, we see in state news, cruisers that are hit, fire engines that are hit, things of that sort. So of your 3 headquarters units that are available to respond, 2 of them are tied up anytime we're on the highway, which is a couple hundred times a year. Most often, that's going to leave the ladder truck with the 2 firefighters remaining for all remaining fire and EMS incidents. I want to walk you through 2 different days that occurred while I was preparing for this workshop, and it was January 10th and January 12th. Just to give you some perspective in terms of how fast the day progresses and what kind of resources we stand to obligate to scenes. So on January 10th, 8:55 to 11:04, Engine 1 responded to the Monte Luisa Elementary School for a gas leak that was taking place. 9:15 to 9:42, the rescue was dispatched for chest pain. It cleared at 9:42. At 9:42, it was then dispatched right away to assist a patient that was very ill to Yale New Haven Hospital. 9:53, Monte Luisa was dispatched to assist at Monte Luisa School. The attempt there was to relieve Engine 1 with a volunteer engine so that Engine 1 would be available to respond to other incidents that were occurring in town. There was no response from Monte Luisa, meaning Engine 1 had to stay there from 8:55 to 11:04. At 10:09, Truck 1 was dispatched for a seizure, and it cleared at 10:40. At 10:28, there was a head-on accident on Middletown Avenue. It was reported as 2 patients that were thrown from the motor vehicle, and I had no fire department resources to send. Fortunately, the occupants were not thrown from the vehicle, but there were still 3 significant injuries on scene and significant hazards from the motor vehicle accident. That's how fast things can happen, that I have no units available to send. On January 12th, 2 days later, Engine 1 and Truck 1 responded for a commercial fire alarm. There was no response from the volunteers. This would be from Northeast. From 9:21 to 9:41, Rescue 1 was dispatched for an individual with chest pain. So right there, you lost the 3 apparatus from headquarters. They were tied up at other scenes. 10:35 to 11:07, Engine 1 Truck and Rescue 1 responded for a smell of smoke in a house. Engine 6 was able to respond from the west side with 2 volunteers. The second engine did not get out. 10:38, we had no units available for a person with difficulty breathing. 10:41, units available for chest pain, had nobody able to respond. 10:46, the rescue was able to clear 5 minutes after the call had received. and the rescue was able to respond to a stroke. So there's 2 days that shows 3, nearly 4 calls in which we had no units to send.
AMR responded to the other 2 medicals?
And let me just be very clear with that. AMR, our commercial ambulance provider, is always responding to the medicals. It's not like these individuals had no response. Again, but if you look at the model of the fire department, the model of the fire department is to arrive on scene, assess the patient, and begin to initiate care. So it is, AMR did still respond. There's no question. The person still did get transported to the hospital.
Do we contract with AMR?
We do not contract with them, no. They have a state, state law that allows them to provide patient care to our citizens.
So where are they situated?
They position a vehicle in town, 1 or 2?
They try to.
They try to.
There's usually always a vehicle on Divine Street.
In that parking lot there.
Yeah, I go by it every day.
In that commercial lot there.
But that's covering the first 911 call. I mean, look at these days that are happening. I mean, in a matter of
Yeah.
minutes, you're getting multiple calls that are coming in.
Okay.
Again, going back to a comment that was made before about paramedic versus an EMT, we can quickly just hit that again. The scope of care for a paramedic, significant cardiac recognition of care, and drugs and so forth that can be administered to the patient in recognition of a cardiac event, the ability to intubate patients and provide respirations in the event of respiratory failure, the ability to administer medications to somebody who's having shortness of breath is something that an EMT cannot do. The level of education for an EMT is 80 to 100 hours versus a paramedic is 1,100 to nearly 2,000 hours. So the level of difference in care is quite substantial. Currently, the fire department has 10 paramedics. But again, only 1 can operate at a time. Go back to that slide where the rescue is the only operating apparatus with a paramedic. If I put a paramedic on any other apparatus, I stand to lose that personnel from an apparatus because I have to transport to the hospital. You now lose your fire suppression in town. The proposal that we have is we need to be able to begin looking at staffing additional career firefighters. To lessen the impact on the town, I propose that we hire 8 firefighters this fiscal year that would immediately staff another rescue with a paramedic. The following fiscal year, hire an additional 8 firefighters that now could staff a second engine, and that engine would operate as a paramedic engine. The apparatus will be located in the Montelise section of town, which currently accounts for the furthest travel distance for headquarters. Doing so will decrease our dependency on mutual aid. We'll have a second engine available to respond to incidents. We'll be able to provide mutual aid reciprocity quite easily because we'll have a second engine staff that I know is available, not only for the citizens of town, but for the infrequent times that is requested outside of town. These requirements that we have to face as well are that we need to provide a second layer of supervision. So with the increase of 8 firefighters, you'll see on the back side of this calculation sheet that I gave you are the budget calculations for hiring 8 additional firefighters, and with that, elevating 4 firefighters to the officer level. I'm currently at the max span of control per OSHA for the number of firefighters to officers. OSHA defines the max span of control as 1 officer for every 7 firefighters. I'm currently at that with 8. I have 1 officer and 7 firefighters. In order for us to add additional career staff, we have to add a second layer of supervision. Those calculations account for that.
How will this affect the tax structure in the town? How many mills are we talking about here, Chief?
So my budget only reflects the salary. It does not reflect the benefits, which is why I would rely on this board and the Director of Finance to provide that.
I would guess it would probably increase his budget by 50%, which would be just under 2 mils. in that ballpark? I don't know, Ed can
Yeah.
figure the numbers out. But
So-
it would be in that ballpark.
An item that came up, keeping in mind the number of incidents that we're not able to respond to, our current restraints on having one paramedic and one engine and one rescue, I want to bring to the attention to this board a comment that was provided in the past to the zoning board. I'm asked to comment on different projects for zoning. For 3 different projects, my words, my comments back was this: please note that the intended use and or occupancy of this project will further draw upon existing fire and EMS response assets that are unable to adequately respond to and provide a consistent level of emergency services. I'm hoping that with keeping in mind what I've shown you today in terms of our current deficiencies in our response model, you have some appreciation for why I need to be able to say that. And I said that for 3 different properties. They are all proposed living units that had an excess of 100 residential units, and for the most part, senior living. If we continue to add complexes like that to North Haven, we're continuing to draw upon the resources of the fire department. So that's why those comments were provided.
Now, Rich, getting back to your question, or Jim, your question as to how many mills, our intention would be to apply for a federal grant. Now, obviously, we're not sure that we would be awarded that grant to add the additional 8 firefighters after this budget. But certainly, that would be something that we would apply for. And as in the past, the grant underwrites the cost for a sliding period of time, and then ultimately, it's our ultimate responsibility to pay 100% of the salaries. But we certainly would look to apply for a federal grant.
And if this did come to fruition, how will this affect the OT?
It's a great question. If you look at, again, the 3 apparatus that are staffed now, and we're looking to bring on additional staff to staff additional apparatus, this board and the Board of Fire Commission can determine if they want to drop down on staff, and if in doing so, it's going to drop down on number of apparatus that are available to respond.
I think that's where you talked about, well, if we brought 8 firefighters on board, which would mean 2 paramedic or both firefighters per shift, so there would be 2 per shift, and we currently are at 8. That would give us an opportunity potentially that we would have 8 plus the 2, that would be 10. We could drop it down to 9 if we had a person that was going to be on vacation or personal time, and we potentially would not have to replace that person as far as overtime is concerned. But again, keep in mind, it's contractual, and I think what Mike was talking about, I think if we look at a retirement opportunity for those senior persons, and to reduce the amount of vacation and time that they have available in conjunction with adding these people on board, I think we potentially could have a positive effect on the overtime if we're able to marry those 2 programs together.
That's true, Pat. These people would be housed, these new firemen would be housed in Montauk?
That's correct.
But you had no response time up in the Northeast on 2 days.
Why
would you put them in
It's just as much in
Montauk?
Montauk, sir. It's everywhere.
It's the distance, Jim.
Yeah, that was that particular day for that particular call, but we're seeing that throughout town. And this slide here, then I know there's another question. This slide here kind of shows the Montauk area of town is the furthest travel distance from headquarters. This is Rand McNally, so it's a reputable source in terms of determining travel distance. I selected a town property on Brockett Farm Road so as not to throw anybody concerned that I was using their address. It's a 12-minute response time from headquarters to that area of town. Putting an apparatus down at Montauk East makes a significant difference in terms of fire development. You consider a fire doubles in size every 30 seconds. And the fact that for a medical incident, every minute that goes by, brain cells die, lung tissue dies, heart tissue dies. So cutting down that travel distance makes a huge difference.
To give you a ballpark on your question about the overtime, and you're talking about adding
Apparatus.
an apparatus in, it probably maybe would drop 150, 200,000. I would think it's in that ballpark. Maybe even a little less, maybe more like the 125, 150. Again, we can get Ed to run numbers for us.
You have
We're just
to,
shooting from the
yeah,
hip.
you have to balance,
Because you would need 6 of those men just to do, or 5.5 of those men, basically just to do the other apparatus.
you have to balance the number on shift, the number of apparatus that you want to staff.
No, I'm just saying, adding one piece of equipment would require you,
To hire 8
paramedic,
firefighters.
would eat up about 5.5 men, 5, 6 men, between 5 and 6 men, to run that 24/7. Another piece of apparatus with 2 men on it,
Yeah.
Right.
right? There's 5
Well,
to
there's
6 men.
4 shifts. That's why I'm asking
Yeah.
for 8 firefighters. 4
No,
shifts.
I was just trying to see how many people we would eat up. Or you tell me, I shouldn't try and figure it out. How many people, for you to add another apparatus with 2 men on it, 24/7, how many bodies is that in the week? How many men does that really make?
There'd be 10 assigned to the shift.
Just the added apparatus. Just the added apparatus.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I
I think it's
follow
the
you.
8, isn't it the 8 you're talking about?
Yeah, we staff.
what we
with-
have now.
Right, we staff with 8 right now per shift. That allows us to staff the 3 apparatus you saw pictured earlier in the
All right, so you
presentation.
need to staff with,
So if I'm gonna staff another rescue, which is this year's
Yep.
goal, that's 2 more additional per shift.
That's 10
which
per
is-
shift.
That's,
you
it's 10
run,
per shift.
you run 24-hour shifts, 7 days a week.
Yeah, but they have
So-
four divisions.
Right.
But,
4 divisions, they would need 2 more people on each division.
yeah.
8 guys.
So it's,
Eight
oh, just 8 guys just to run the apparatus. Your
Just to-
overtime's then getting eliminated 0. The overtime actually will go up.
Right.
It's not gonna go
Right.
down.
Right.
So you actually have more people of sick days and so forth that you have to cover, too.
That's
Yeah.
true. Very
With the new
good.
people.
So your overtime
That
isn't
way.
being diminished at all by adding 8 men. Your
No.
overtime actually is increasing by adding 8 men.
Right.
But that's why I'm saying, I think what Mike was alluding to, I think we would need to marry the 2 programs together where we potentially would be able to offer an early retirement, if you will.
But again, that's a one-time deal. That's something,
I understand, but what, that impacts the persons that come on board with going from 30 and 24 vacation days down to 6? Was it
no,
6?
the next one was, I think,
No,
New
the entry
employees
level,
start at 6.
entry
entry
level
level.
positions begin at 6, Rich. So, I mean, that's a significant reduction.
yeah, but it's something that, you have for a period of years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever it is, and you're back up to those numbers again anyway. I'm just looking at the overall impact of adding 8 men is gonna actually increase overtime.
But
And
it's
how would
also,
you-
It's
we
gonna
need to
increase
look at.
overtime hours.
We need to look at the
Let's not talk
benefit.
about dollars,
yeah.
let's talk about hours.
Yeah, we need to look at the
Increase
benefit
overtime.
also. The benefit is going to be an opportunity to have another paramedic on board that's going to perform the duties that are
Granted.
necessary.
Granted.
So there's a,
No, but the question
Yes, the
that
cost.
Jim was asking was, would it reduce overtime? And in reality, it will increase overtime hours.
Correct.
It will.
How do you, how, would you be able to recruit 8?
You know, that's another good question.
Because I mean,
Yeah.
I get we're talking about benefits and cost savings, but
Yeah.
what's the incentive for people to want to do this job and get trained into it as well? I mean, yes, there's a need to want to help people, but I hear, the more vacation, what's the incentive? How easily can you recruit people? That's another question.
So what we would likely have to do is hire as many of those as being paramedics as possible, but then hire EMTs as well. Again, you need to have a paramedic available on that apparatus. Doesn't mean we need to hire 8 paramedics. I have 10 existing now in the department. If I can hire, let's say, 4 or 5 more, we have enough paramedics where I can ensure that 3 to 4 staff per shift. There will likely not be 8 paramedics available for hire. I'd like to think that there would be, but every fire department in the region right now is hiring paramedics, and they come at a, you can almost pick which place you want to work for right now. You can pick which town you want to work for. And the paramedics are not becoming as available as we would hope. It's a 2-year plus project, in terms of attendance to a class, and it is I wouldn't say it is a slim pass rate, but is a pass rate that really challenges the average student.
and I think when you look at the pool of paramedics, what they're doing is they're applying to fire departments throughout the region. And municipalities as employers have different compensation schedules, and so they're looking for the max for the minimum. I'm looking for the most amount of money as I can generate, and North Haven certainly isn't at the top of the schedule. It's a great town to work in. I think the environment, the administration, and certainly the town itself is better in my estimation than going to some of the big cities. But again, I think when people are looking to support their families, they're looking for the maximum amount of compensation. So that puts us at a bit of a deficit as well.
And that's exactly why I'm bringing it up.
You understand that?
Because there's a trade-off.
Yep.
And what's the incentive?
Yeah, and I'm hopeful, this would be, unfortunately, there's pros and cons to this, but I'm hopeful that I could hire a number of volunteer firefighters that are currently volunteering for town. But that'll, of course, take away from the but they're owed that. They're owed that opportunity. They're volunteering for the town now. But that would be my hope, was that I could hire as many volunteers as I can. I have 2 to 3 volunteers now who are in paramedic school. They're not paramedics yet, where I'm hopeful that I could hire those individuals. If I don't, another town's going to, just in a matter of time. Because I know of a number of students who are hired while they're in school. And they're hired contingent upon you successfully passing, but they're hired while they're in school. But the important thing to keep in mind is that I'm looking at the number of calls that I'm responding to. Last year, we responded to 4,384 incidents. Of those 4,384 incidents, the public expected perfection on every one of them. They expected a response on every one of them. And they expect a paramedic on nearly every one of them. We're not able to provide that right now. And that's what I have to bring to this board, the deficiencies that we're facing right now. And I'm being asked, am I going to bring up the issue of staffing with this board? So understand that I'm being tasked with bringing this to light and planning accordingly for it.
The scenarios you played out, I mean, we all know that or think about it, but until you walked us through it really became more of a reality. And for people watching too, because everybody not necessarily thinking about those items that you talked about, that things happen really quickly, and there is an expectation that you guys are there immediately.
Dan, I don't think I think if we talk about number of calls missed, people can identify with that, but when you start looking at how fast the resources we have are drawn upon and called upon, and then how other calls are coming in, we are understaffed right now as a department.
And those accidents, I mean, I heard about those and saw those. I'm like, you guys are there, you got to cover the highways too. And there's a lot of accidents on the highways.
You might not have this answer, but Chief, the police respond when there's a fire or an accident. Are they paramedics?
No, sir.
No.
They're probably EMTs. They must be.
Some of them are EMTs. Yeah. During our focus group meetings that the chief alluded to earlier, that we have quite frequently, it's made up of 9 or 10 residents that come in and receive a similar overview of what's happening in the department, and they voice their concerns and opinions as to what their expectations are. Almost every one of those persons who attend those meetings are willing to pay additional monies, if you will, for services. In many cases, they're never given the opportunity to understand what the cost would be. And Jim, you brought up a good point. Well, how many mills is it going to be, and what's the actual cost? And Rich you came up with a number.
Ballpark.
A ballpark. There's a number, and the folks at the focus group meeting indicated that during the budget cycle, if they were given an opportunity to vote on what that additional cost would be for fire department safety, they would be willing to vote on it as we vote on the education side and the town side, and maybe this extremely expensive expenditure that we're looking at in this particular budget. They are all interested in voicing their opinion, and I think your commission is going to hear from a number of persons that are in support of additional personnel for the fire department for their own families, because like you it comes to reality when you actually see it. And these folks have seen it firsthand, just as you've seen it today. So my expectation is, well, your committee as well as the Board of Selectmen are going to have a number of people that are going to come before you articulating their positive message about enhancing the services for the town and their willingness, I don't know about the mass majority of the people, their willingness to go ahead and underwrite the cost of that. So to be determined if they have an opportunity to do so.
We're winding down here, but quickly I want to cover why more staffing now. It's simply, we're tasked as with anybody else to do more with less, and that's not an option on fire scenes. I can't perform the job with less. It's a very uneasy feeling to turn around and know what needs to be done at the fire scene in terms of the roof needs to be cut, a second line to be pulled to the second floor, we need to do a search on the basement to make sure there's no illegal bedrooms in there, and turn around and have nobody to do that task. I can't do more with less in this business. It becomes unsafe. Now it has become unsafe, but I'm asking the individuals who are performing that task to do things unnecessarily that are perhaps could be deemed unsafe because I'm put into the point of physical exhaustion. I'm asking them to go through and deplete an entire bottle of air and come out and change a bottle of air and go right back out and do it again. And that's like running a mile with 100 pounds on your back and then coming out and being done and putting another tank on your back and going back in. This isn't a business you can do more with less. I need to have enough personnel on scene to do the job safely. And this is without weather extremes of being extremely cold or extremely hot. Those all draw an impact on our resources as well. We're looking at a number of incidents starting to rise year after year. Look at economic development. It's going to it's great for the town. I live in town. I want to see economic development, but it's having a draw on resources for the fire department.
A number of our focus group participants indicated that if this doesn't happen, the fire department will just have to take a defensive position. You have a house fire. As the chief indicated, you run out of air, you can't run that firefighter back in with another bottle of air. So basically you wind up with a perimeter of defense, and you make sure that the fire doesn't spread to the neighboring properties. Obviously, then you end up with a total loss or a significant loss, which becomes an insurance issue, and the resident, I think, has an expectation that the fire department is going to perform whatever duties that are necessary to protect property and certainly save lives. And if that's our position, and that's the amount of risk that we want to take as a Board of Finance and a fire department, so be it. It's up to the residents of this town, and I clearly understand that. We can't be all things to all people for every circumstance. But I think, again, as I said at the very beginning, we've got a fiduciary responsibility as a fire commission to present what our needs are of the department, as the chief clearly articulated. And I think it's entirely up to this commission, this board, and to the residents of the town to make that determination. We're thrilled with the presentation that the chief has put together, and we're hopeful that this commission will seriously consider what our requests are.
Very good. Moving on to some capital, and we can get through that rather fast. Apparatus replacement. You'll see in my capital replacement line I have apparatus replacement on there. This is the direct result of House Bill 7047, which was passed in October of 2017. You'll see that in the handout that I gave you. It is the public bill as was passed. It is an act concerning municipal fire apparatus safety and testing. It requires NFPA 1911 compliance, which requires annual testing and inspections, which is the reason why I'm asking for the increase in the maintenance line, because I need to ensure I'm continuing to provide that annual testing and inspections according to state law. It also has with it a mandatory retirement of 25 years for all fire apparatus. I did not interpret this law myself. I asked one of the town attorneys to do so. Attached within the documents that I provide is a memo from Attorney Jennifer Coppola, which covers her interpretation of the House bill as was passed and the direct result of it. You're looking at the impact of House Bill 7047 on the North Haven
Can we pause there for 1 second?
Yeah, where's
Sure.
Jennifer's?
Jennifer's memo says she recommends. I read that differently as requires.
Okay.
Did you talk to her about that at all?
We talked to her about it, and it comes down to her words to me were, we need to plan for replacement this next budget year. And my feeling is, she did not think that it was prudent that right then and there in October, these apparatus needed to come out of service. Her words to me were, moving forward this next year, you need to be able to plan for this replacement.
And
What
I
happens
don't
if the
thi-
town can't afford it? What happens if you can't adhere to these guidelines?
That's, I don't know what would happen. All I know is right now, this is what we're looking at in terms of our apparatus and the age of it. The apparatus would either have to come out of service, or the town would be taking what I perceive to be a significant risk in keeping the apparatus on the road based upon that bill that was passed. CCM provided input during the hearing process of that bill and estimated that a number of towns would face $1 million expense because of the passage of this bill.
So there's 8 engines on this list, so we keep 2 per station, is that what we do?
Correct.
And engine one is the pumper?
They're all pumpers. Engine 1 is out of headquarters. That's correct.
Which one carries the water?
They all those carry water. There's 2 assigned to each station.
I concur with Tim. Yeah, first of all, vehicles have to be DOT roadworthy, pumpers have to pump.
Yep.
Anything short of that, equipment shouldn't exist in one of your departments, one of your houses. As far as having to be replaced after 25 years, yes, if it doesn't meet those standards, in year 20, it should be replaced. But if it's meeting that standard, I don't see this regulation saying it has to be replaced.
When we have a call, Paul, so are these 2 per station, is it one primary and one backup if the first engine is out of service, or do we don't
Yes.
send both on every call, right?
Depending on the call you do. Depending on the call, both are dispatched. Again, it's a
Right.
completely argument, are they actually responding or not?
Right.
But yes, there is one, without getting into great detail, there is one primary and one backup in each station.
What I said kind of made sense?
What you said makes sense.
Okay.
That's
a good thing.
The NFPA standard says right in it, replacement of apparatus in 25 years in the annex portion of the standard.
We're talking about the state standard
The
again.
NFPA, the National Fire
But
Protection.
we're not governed by that. We're governed
Well,
by
that's
the
what the-
federal.
The
that's
House
what
bill
the-
references
that's House bill
that
references
NFPA
that.
standard.
Right.
But the state doesn't say.
So let me
That's something
say-
for us to discuss
Here's what
anyway.
would happen, okay? The state is not going to come in here and say, you have to do that. But if one of those engines goes down and we didn't do it, then we're gonna have a huge liability problem here. That's the liability. The bill is saying what it says, Jennifer is saying what she says. If we choose not to do it, we run the risk of that vehicle going down, then we'll have a problem. That's the issue.
Yeah, it isn't only the vehicle going down mechanically, it's the safety aspect of the vehicle. It's 25 years old, and obviously the new apparatus have greater safety precautions in their new vehicles than those from 25 years ago. After 25 years of carrying water and all the weight that they're carrying, they might still be able to pump, and they might still be able to start up and go, because we try and make sure from the mechanical standpoint that these apparatus are able to get out the door. But they're no way worthy of being on the road today after 25 years of service. So, and I think that's what the national and the state mandate is indicating. And, and thanks to Len and Dave, they've given us their feedback on this. They've interpreted this, spoke to the chief about it, spoke to the commission about it. We passed it on to the town attorney, and that was their opinion.
And I am correct in saying there's not a piece of equipment in Company 1 that is more than 4 years old.
That is more than 40. No, the ladder truck is, but the ladder.
Well, the ladder truck's
truck's
being- you know the ladder truck's
that's
being
correct.
replaced.
Yes.
So ladder truck is brand new.
Rescue's
Engine 1 is
year-old.
4-year, rescue 1. So we don't have, really, the oldest piece of equipment we have in the paid house
Correct.
is 4 years old.
Correct.
Okay.
And when we were talking earlier about adding staff to Montauk's and having an engine or apparatus to support them, Were you talking about a ninth engine or one of the 8
Now,
that?
one of these would be utilized. There'd be no capital expense for that.
Probably engine 7.
But, I mean, and I don't mean to sound critical when I say this, but are we really gonna try to keep 27 and 31-year-old engines
No,
in
of course
service?
not.
No, I was just trying to see if you meant
That-
9 or 9
That's all I'm
engines,
getting at,
Yeah.
is I know that you can look at a fire engine that's 25 years old and one that was built yesterday, and the untrained eye would recognize very few differences. But the anti-rollover device, the ABS braking system, the restraint systems inside, they've all completely changed.
Understood.
You know, so that's why we're looking at that.
Well, why don't you share with the Board of Finance how we put it in the budget to pay for it?
So I think I have that on here. This here is, the proposal is to replace the 2 oldest engines. We've identified a cost of 1.15 million for that. The intent would be to structure that over a lease period, very similar to the ladder truck. I provided for you 2 different quotes in terms of how much those apparatus would cost. Going back on previous presentations to this board, the intention is to diversify the fleet, to not have duplicate apparatus, if you will, in each firehouse, which is why one of the apparatus is coming out to $400,000. It would be what we refer to as an urban interface engine. We currently do not have the means of going off-road, going into the freight yard, going into the cattails off of 91, going in different areas because we don't have off-road capability. This engine would have that, but would also serve as a primary fire engine. I can't go completely the direction of too different of an apparatus than we have now, because when the primary apparatus is out of service, I need to have something else that could fill its same role, its same function. So you have 2 different quotes there. One for in excess of $750,000 for a main engine, and that would replace engine 1. I know that engine 1 is only 4 years old. We're looking at not getting this engine for another year, and we've learned that engine 1 being used out of headquarters as often and as frequently as it is therefore subject to replacement that much sooner. So the intent would be to replace engine 1, take engine 1, put it somewhere else. You always want to replace your busiest apparatus because it's what's being used and being worn the fastest. So the quotes, while they exceed $750, and I have another one here that's almost $800, I've already looked at the quotes and I can get them down to $750 by eliminating some of the things that aren't required. So the intent would be a $750,000 engine and a $400,000 engine, which comes out to 1.15. Structure that in a lease scenario, lease to own scenario, similar to what we're doing with the ladder truck. It would be a minimal capital expense over the next so many years. If you recall, the fire department attempted to replace 2 of these 3 apparatus, one of which is out of service now anyways, in 2014 at a cost of $1.6 million in a bonding package that was turned down. So we're not far off from that number. We're looking at 2 of the 3 now that need to be replaced.
Does the urban interface pumper carry water?
It does, 750 gallons of water, so that in the event that that main engine is out of service for any number of reasons, because these things come out of service, they're maintenance hogs. Anything is these days for a fire engine, no matter what manufacturer you go with. So while that engine will be out of service, this engine sitting in a firehouse can still perform the functions of the other primary
So
engine.
what capability does the urban interface pumper not have that it's costing $375,000 less?
Smaller.
It's smaller, and it does not have nearly the amount of equipment on it. So when we're looking at replacing engine 1, we're looking at replacing engine 1 because it is almost an engine rescue, if you will. We don't have heavy rescue in town. So you see some towns and it looks like giant toolboxes going down the road. No
Yeah.
ladder up top, but they're called TACs, or they're called heavy rescues. We don't have one. So we buy our engines large enough to be able to put some of that equipment on it so that we can perform both functions when we arrive on scene. And the main engine would have more water as well.
Yeah. So when you say you have one or the other, which would still be the primary, the Pierce or the Rosenbaum?
The Pierce would be the primary
Yeah.
in that case. Now, I am looking to structure the terminology of this very specifically to represent, if it is in fact granted and passed, to represent first year payment / AFG grant, or AFG cost share. We can work on the exact terminology for that. I'm preparing a grant now to the federal government to replace the $400,000 engine. I'm hopeful that I'm successful in doing so through FEMA. Understand that apparatus are the most highly competitive grants in the country. They're also the most scrutinized in the country, meaning that on paper we may look like we're good. We scored high enough. They're then going to start digging into the newspaper articles and digging into our finances. If we already have money put aside to buy the engine, they're not going to give us the money. So we're not going to have the money put aside. We're not going to have 1.15 put aside. We're going to have the first year lease payment or the cost share match of that engine. So I hope to come back to this board summertime and say we were successful in obtaining the grant. Your lease payments now are going to be even less over the next so many years. The first year will already be set. We can put the first portion of payment towards the larger purchase of the engine, and the second payment will have that 1 year, and that's it, because it'll be a $40,000 cost share roughly. I'm hopeful that we can replace the engine. Last year, FEMA started replacing engines at 28 years old. They had thousands and thousands of applications. 28 years old was the earliest that they replaced.
Good thing we have a couple old ones.
Not only that, but a couple of them, so it actually looks good, right? Capital plan, again, moving forward, these are quick, is I'm proposing that we replace 2 admin vehicles. I only have 4 admin vehicles. I'm looking to replace 2 of them. One is a 2011 retired police cruiser with 110,000 miles, and one is a 2009 Ford Explorer, 133,000 miles. They're both showing signs of their age, and I have no spare admin vehicles. I'm again asking for a utility vehicle. We do not have a four-wheel drive pickup truck, utility truck, what have you, to be able to do our job at times. There are times that we need to retrieve hose from fire scenes, SCBA's from fire scenes, gear that's absolutely filthy that you don't want inside a $500,000, $750,000 engine until you get it cleaned. There are times that we actually need to go out and shovel out hydrants. There are times we need to go out and actually maintain hydrants. We have hydrants in town that are grown to the point you can't see them anymore, and we're looking to be able to go out there and take care of hydrants. If you look at simply recycling, having to bring, I got a headquarters station, we receive deliveries every day. I need to put recycling in the back of an ambulance right now to get it to recycling. That's what that picture is showing you. I have no other vehicle to put it in. So it goes into what should be considered a clean and relatively sterile environment. We put the recycling in there to get it there.
We can't get
We're
Public
talking
Works,
about-
we can't get Public Works to pick up our
plastic
own,
bottles and
our own
such?
recycling?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Can't someone call
Right
Victor and
behind the
ask him to swing
station, we'll get it
by?
picked up.
You can talk to Victor about that.
I can.
The,
Well, it's 2 plow trucks and.
That's right.
This is easy.
Another.
And I would assume, shoveling out hydrants, you would send an engine because they need to respond if there's a call.
At times, how about plowing? I mean, I like to be able to plow our own stations. If we have an incident that's occurring in town where we can't get an occupant out of their driveway because they've got a foot of snow, 18 inches of snow, you know how exhausting it is to shovel a path for the stretcher from the street to the front door? It'd be great to be able to have that ready to go so that we can plow out that, get the person out in a hurry. So there are times that we need that ability to be able to serve as a utility function. Looking at the off-road gator that we have, East Haven had a plane crash about a year ago. They started to ask for all-terrain vehicles from surrounding towns. It took me over 30 minutes to assemble that off-road vehicle onto a trailer. I had to call Public Works, get a trailer, get them to bring it, get it unhooked, get it hooked back up, put a gator on it, and get it ready. That's over 30 minutes. We need to be able to respond faster than that, and that's just for an incident outside of town.
So what kind of utility vehicle are we talking here?
The police department purchased one not that long ago. It was a white box pickup truck is all that it was, and that's what we're looking to ensure we have available for us. Station security, we're looking at $20,000 in station security. Again, the chair made reference before of one of our fire stations being broken into. I have another where cars are vandalized. We're looking to start to put in CCTV monitoring in the stations so that we can monitor security. We have 2 of our stations that are sit adjacent to schools. We have pedestrians at frequent headquarters all the time. We have packages that are dropped off. We don't know where they came from. There have been times that they're suspicious. We are looking to ensure that we can provide the security for the stations and start to implement that.
Fire station is a drop-off point for infants,
Yeah, it is a state law that allows infants
so they
to be
leave
dropped off
them,
there
just
anytime.
ring the bell, leave them and leave?
They can.
So wouldn't cameras maybe make them not do that?
It's not stopping them already from police departments, but it's
Oh, they
something.
do that at police too?
Yeah.
I would just want them not to not do it.
That's not going to stop them, but
Okay.
that's something that we need to at least be aware of what's taking place.
I was kind of on board until I seen that item.
Yeah. CERT vehicle, you heard me talk about the CERT team before. This is $10,000. What I intend to do with this, I can't buy a vehicle, I can't add a vehicle to the fleet unless it appears in the capital line in the budget. So I'm looking to have a $10,000 line there where I can buy an old bottle delivery truck, I can buy an old ambulance, I can buy an old something, and be able to allow the CERT team to mobilize that and bring it to scenes or use it for different sheltering functions that they have to perform. They need to be able to carry with them a number of different items. They don't have the means to do so. I need to look in the future of getting them a vehicle. You may recall the fire we had last summer. We had Hamden come in and provide an old retired senior bus that they will provide as rehab to the firefighters on scene, to the residents. That's essentially what I'm looking to do. I can't purchase that unless it appears somewhere in the capital plan.
We have.
This would be dedicated to CERT. It has to be.
I'm going to buy the senior one, thinking the old one.
All right, well, we got some options, Rich is telling me. so.
Sure. So in conclusion, this is the last slide. We just need to plan for the future. And collectively, we need to determine what an acceptable level of risk is for the community.
Yeah.
And that's what this comes down to.
Thank you, Chief.
Well, I'd like to make one comment. And this is probably the most in-depth, informative presentation this board has ever got from the fire department. Very, very, did a nice job, Chief. Pete.
Did a great job.
Thank you. We're trying to be as transparent as possible and give you more than information than you've asked for in the past.
We would like a copy of your presentation. We don't have your PowerPoint.
Sure, I'll have that to you.
As I said at the beginning, this is a daunting task for your committee. We recognize how difficult it is. But again, it's our responsibilities to make sure that you have the information and you come to the conclusion as to, as the chief is indicating, what the level of risk is for the community that you think is necessary. We feel what the chief has presented is exactly what we need. I think this committee needs to determine whether or not whatever we're proposing needs to be part of the referendum, especially as it pertains to the number of personnel that we're requesting to add. But again, that would be absolutely up to the Board of Selectmen and your committee. Thank you very much for listening to us.
Any other questions, please?
May I start?
Yes.
Start?
He's got a list.
It's been quiet.
Yeah,
it's been
instead of
quiet.
one today, I write this here,
Quiet.
whole presentation,
Sure.
and then we can get to
The nuts and bolts.
the issues here. Now, you should know there's always been concern about the overtime line. And the reason is because I don't think we ever got word that you changed your shift from 7 to 8 per shift. And you know when you did that, it comes at a cost to the town. And I understand that you have to do it. I mean, from what you've shown us today, you know, certainly your resources, manpower is stretched, and it makes sense. But we were critical of it. Tim was at the last meeting, saying what we've been saying all along. Can you control that line, because we didn't know that you had to fill these additional hours. I mean, that change from 7 to 8, that makes a big difference to your labor budget. And so now we understand.
Okay.
So we're happy that, and going over your manpower cost today, I echo what Jim said. It was an extremely good explanation. We always try a little bit to understand operationally, how you staff each shift, and what your choices are, and how the contracts affect what you have to do. And I do agree with the idea of splitting up discretionary and non-discretionary overtime. I mean, that, to me, that makes your expenses on a month-to-month basis a lot clearer to us. But I want to understand our reliance on AMR, because, you know, for years, they were the primary means of medical response, and we knew that that was becoming inadequate, and that's why the town took that responsibility over. And when paramedics got added a few years ago, we thought that the beneficial effect on the budget was, well, that's an 8th person per shift, and you're only staffing 7, so we thought we were going to get some savings back in overtime. So that's disappeared now. But AMR is a company that's been assigned to us through this contract.
They hold the PSA.
They hold the PSA. Now the PSA, it's for our region or our town?
They hold it all over the state of Connecticut with only a couple of exceptions. So they're a national company. They're the most powerful national ambulance company in the United States. They've had the PSA back to the 70s. Milford's the only city, and maybe one other, that has contested the PSA and actually has won the case. And we have been looking at that right along.
We are, because my question is, how long will this arrangement continue? And would we be obligated to contract with another private company?
Yes.
Or could we actually run an ambulance service?
Well, I mean, that's
because we're already responding.
So understand this, okay? People have to understand this, that if a PSA changes, there's going to be another contracted ambulance company. It could be Hunters, it could be Nelson, it could be anybody. The chief has done a great job in rewriting the EMS guidelines. I have now become chairman of MedCom in the area with all the chief elected officials. Paul's the chairman of the Fire Chiefs Operational Committee of MedCom. All of the towns in MedCom are AMR right now. So, but fire departments all over, as Paul mentioned, generally when a 911 call comes in, they're the first responders. And then AMR comes in with the supplemental coverage and then the transport down to the hospitals. There are a couple of communities, Wallingford, I think Milford does it too, in a hybrid, that has the transport aspect, meaning they have their own ambulance. But that is millions of dollars upfront cost to any community.
Okay.
So there's a big distinction here.
I just want to know what we are considering. What are the options, and what might we transition to, and how would it affect us?
One of the things I would like to see happen is if whoever we negotiate the contract with, is that we make it mandatory that they have a paramedic. So that it does not take your personnel off the street.
I agree.
Does not take your unit out
That
of
will
town.
likely come at an expense. And the reason for that is you have 4 or 5 calls at a time occurring, sometimes 6 that we're not responding to, but it's that non-critical call. There's not 4 or 5 paramedics available just for North Haven. And if you wanted to start to require that, it's going to cost the town probably what it's going to cost a town to just continue to add firefighters and paramedics.
Because whoever
Get that
we,
dual role.
to your point, Paul, to whomever we contract with, they're not just going to be a North Haven contract. They're going to be working in other cities and towns in the region.
Maybe that's where that industry needs to evolve to.
It does, but we're not going to be able to control it, nor are we going to be able to put a timeline on when that's going to take place. We're working as aggressively as we can. The EMS plan was filed at the end of 2017, and now we're beginning the steps to move forward. The contracted carrier may continue to be AMR. It's going to depend on, and we can set the parameters then in terms of what the response time of the ambulance needs to be. We can start to ask for what they need to provide, but we want to do it at a minimal expense to the town And we need to look at how many calls were actually taking place in town.
Where's the AMR expense in our budget right now?
There is
We don't pay.
there's no
We don't
AMR.
pay.
No.
So they,
They bill.
They bill.
right.
So,
So if they had a paramedic, would they bill more for each?
It's based on the call.
Each patient?
It's based on the call. If the call's at a certain level that they can bill paramedic service, they would bill it out. But if the call's, I cut my finger and it's not a paramedic necessity, they can't bill at that level.
Right,
So
so.
you can probably stagger something, I would assume, with them, with
Yeah.
paramedic, more so that I don't even really need them per se, the third call being, say, a paramedic, but I need to make sure that one of those calls, one of those paramedics is available to respond for transport to release your people.
Yeah, I mean, and if I were looking to add 3 or 4 paramedics, I can see this all being relative, but I'm looking at a second paramedic. No matter, we have 4 or 5 incidents going on at a time. And as you said, we're never going to be able to really insist that a paramedic is available for every incident. We need to be able to
I
have
just wanted to know whether
second paramedic.
adding a paramedic requirement to the first AMR response in town, if that can be done contractually or somehow.
Anything can be done contractually. The chief suggested.
Would that be a way of relieving us from getting additional paramedic firefighters?
well, wait, not, Paul, now correct me if I'm wrong on this. Not under the present format, because they own the PSA.
Right.
They own the PSA for just about every municipality in the state of Connecticut. The reason we've pursued taking back the PSA is for us to then set the standards when we own the PSA. And we don't even know if that's going to be accomplishable through, whatever we end up doing. So as long as a contract carrier owns the PSA for the state or municipality, we can't negotiate that.
And it's worth mentioning as well that.
Well, we could if we took it back.
That would take a significant amount of time, Mike, in order to get that PSA back.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had ongoing discussions with AMR, and I know Mike has met with their senior leaders, as the chief has, and as I have, as recent as last week. It potentially is going to be a significant legal battle that will cost us significant legal dollars to attempt to get that PSA back, if in fact we're successful. And our plan would be to mirror what Milford did, because they were in fact successful. And I think that's where the chief and Mike have been collaborating on that path. But in talking with some folks from AMR, we've clearly indicated that we've already begun the process to obtain the PSA back. And instead of going through a significant legal battle, why don't we go ahead and agree that AMR relinquish the PSA to North Haven, and we would come up with contractual language that would be advantageous for us, whether it be including a paramedic on their ambulance or whatever that language is, in order to try and reduce the legal costs and give us opportunity to have authority over the PSA, if you will.
You're right. And again, we're splitting this discussion into two segments here. Fire protection, medical protection.
Correct.
Okay? But the labor forces overlap.
Correct.
And what I'm trying to do is get to Pat's question before about why AMR and our rescue unit always respond to each medical call if possible. And I was trying to find out through contract changes or through the reacquisition of the PSA, whether we could set a standard or a system of communication that allows you to know if AMR can get there as quickly as you could.
We're working on that. That's exactly what
That's
we're
what we're working on.
Doesn't
So
the PSA
it's a-
expire? When does it expire?
It doesn't.
It doesn't expire.
See, this
Who
is,
awards it?
Because if they can get there in less than 5 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever your standard might be, you don't have to do that. Doesn't have to be a duplicate of response.
see, just the discussion on this Board of Finance is symbolic. Nobody understands this. AMR has had the PSA here for decades.
40 years, right?
AMR came to us and said they've been unfairly criticized because they were on scene in 7 minutes and 23 seconds on a certain incident and responded to 23 other incidents during that particular day. No one understands the complexity of what a PSA is about. Misinformation spread out there, allegations are made, and the reality of the situation is that AMR is the PSA contract carrier for 99.9% of municipalities in the state. So the town can't be criticized for being asked why you're with AMR. Everybody's with AMR, with the exception of Milford. So what we're trying to do is work with AMR to see if we can take the PSA back, avoid the protracted legal battle as Pat's talking about, which will cost the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially, to see if we can still stay in a relationship with AMR with us holding the PSA.
No, I wasn't being critical.
No,
of
I'm not saying
AMR.
you are. A lot of people are.
A lot of people are, though, Mike.
Not you, a lot of people, because they don't understand it. So, and as Paul and I have talked about, we're in a regional format with other cities and towns around this region, all of whom also want to stay, if they can, with AMR.
But they're responding in the exact same way that we are right now. The fire department's responding first, the paramedic is riding in if paramedic is not on the ambulance. We're not changing that model anytime soon.
Right.
Yeah, but that's the choke point on the, they need, if the call requires a paramedic, the transport, they need to have a paramedic to release your staff.
We agree, but they're not statutorily obligated.
Absolutely.
That's why
Right.
we have,
But
if
we
we
have
have a
the
discussion
PSA
with
and
them.
have it. But I know that we come at an additional cost. But then your paramedic won't be down at Yale New Haven needing to be picked up.
Correct.
Right.
Right, this is a model that the town decided to go to in 2010 when it voted at a town meeting to be able to start providing a paramedic and a paramedic service by the fire department. So we've been going down this road for a long time.
That's right.
And a second paramedic is it's gonna add a cost to the taxpayers. I'm not trying to sound like that's not what we're asking for, but it's not gonna fix all the problems either. We have 3, 4, 5 calls
Yeah,
going on
but
at
we
a
wouldn't be
time.
doing our job if we didn't ask these questions
No, I
now to
understand.
try to get out of the setup, the arrangement, the model, whatever, that
Sure.
is currently in practice here.
But keep in mind, Mike, we still are at the mercy of AMR being available. As Rich indicated, yes, they're staged at the parking lot over there off of State Street. They might be staged on Washington Avenue. But if they get called out of our area, then, and someone's having a heart attack, obviously, our paramedics are going to respond within
Right.
minutes.
Yeah,
Which
but all the 911 dispatch should just know what vehicle can get there when, and then move the call to the next available.
Because this is exactly what we're working on.
Next
Correct.
available,
That's exactly what we're
Here's
working
what we're
on.
trying to do. It's a valid question. Here's what we're trying to accomplish regionally, all of us who are with AMR right now. What we're trying to accomplish is, for the lack of a better way to describe it, is a CAD-link technological enhancement that would give our fire department the ability to see AMR calls, AMR ambulance, where they are. The other part to this that a lot of people don't realize, there's a mutual aid component. If AMR is not in the area, then there's a mutual aid list of other ambulance companies that a call goes to. AMR has come to us, which we're looking at now with Medcom, and said we have dished off rollover calls or calls to roll to another company, but they can't get there either. So we're trying to figure this out. Why? Why can't the mutual aid aspect get there either? AMR claims that they're rolling calls to another carrier, but they can't get there. Now, we're trying to get to the bottom of that, too.
You're working
So
on it. All right.
I guess the best way to describe this is, and Paul and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago when we met, you gotta be careful what we wish for. You know, you take the PSA back, you give it to another contract carrier, there's no guarantee things are gonna change. Because the mutual aid aspect is
Again,
something
I wasn't
that-
asking for a change in carrier. I was asking for control over the contract and the specifications in order for us to set the agenda.
Which is what we've been working on
That's
for
exactly what
months.
we're working on.
We'll continue to work towards it as well, but it's going to take some time. And for the purpose of clarification, understand that about a year and a half ago, the North Haven Fire Department assumed the sole responsibility for providing a paramedic on scene. I don't want that to become a technicality moving forward. It was unassigned up until a year and a half ago, in an effort to make it a stronger argument for us to claim the PSA, that being unassigned and us more or less submitting an application for that is now going to make it an easier case for us to look at getting the PSA back.
Okay. My next question by the way, I just want to go over a couple small things here with your current budget. You talked about building plans having to be inspected and analyzed. Now, is that what we use the consultants for? No.
Yeah, the consultant
What's
the consultant is primarily used for the inspections that are taking place. With very few exceptions, the inspections that we're able to start doing now is being performed by the consultant. He also does assist in some building plan, in some permit functions, because a lot of time goes into research of code and coordination with property owners and attorneys, and while he's sitting there doing those functions, a permit comes in to be signed, he's signing a permit as well. So that's why I'm saying 90% of his function is inspections and inspections only.
We have two fire marshals, you're one, and...
Correct.
And,
So myself...
And the assistant chief is...
And the deputy chief of administration is a fire marshal, and then the consultant
Okay.
is a credentialed fire marshal.
He's primarily on the inspections, Paul, to get us into compliance with the state statute, which
Right.
Scott's more on the bundled billing for the...
Yes, Scott is not a credentialed fire marshal as of yet. He will be.
The other deputy chief does the plan review and such?
Yeah, the other deputy chief is doing the plan review for all the buildings that are being built in town. That's correct.
And then the other fire marshal's doing the inspection portion of
The
it?
inspector is doing the inspections. Right.
That's
Yeah.
outside.
Well, okay, that was unclear to me. I thought it was part of plan review, but it's actual inspections. All right, the volunteer recruitment line is at 10,000.
Sure.
Nothing's been expended. What does that line do? What do you do with that line?
So if you recall, that line was put in last fiscal year, I want to say, and that was intended to provide gym memberships for the volunteers. Quite honestly, the reason I have not done anything with that right now is because I saw the writing on the wall for the recent gym closures in town, and I did not want to start looking at a membership until I know kind of where we are right now with gyms in town. 2 of the 3 closed, and I wasn't going to start pursuing a relationship. The prior fiscal year, you see there was money that was in there and that was taken out. But it's something that we need to continue to look at.
Yeah, I don't mind an enticement to get
And that's
volunteers.
exactly what it was.
We are desperately in need of volunteers here.
Right.
Because we look for volunteers as a means to mitigate,
Yeah.
yes, well, we don't want, for our population size, to have a paid fire department that is too burdensome. And that's really what part of the discussion is going to be here in terms of tax dollars down the road. So we'll be having that discussion in the next 2 or 3 months.
This was more of an enticement to try to bring the volunteers in as part of the recruiting campaign.
But if you recall, in order for me to have that kind of expense, I needed to have 3 different locations to consider having that kind of expense in accordance to our purchasing policy. I don't have 3 to compare it to right now. So I'm waiting to see kind of how the next couple of months transpire with those facilities in town so that I can then begin to pursue that for the volunteers once again.
Now, under you, is there someone who manages the volunteers? Or is there someone in each firehouse that manages?
So there's a volunteer leadership in place. So each volunteer station has a volunteer captain, followed by a series of lieutenants thereafter that provide the volunteer leadership, yes.
But in between the captains and you, there's no other...
In between the captains and myself, there's 2 deputy chiefs, a deputy chief of administration and a deputy chief of operations. The deputy chief of operations, which this board underwrote the cost for last year, is intimately involved with the volunteers. He's with them every Wednesday night for drill.
Okay.
Because he is overseeing all training and all EMS.
And we met with the captains, Michael, Paul and I, the chief and I, to find out what it would take, what they needed to help do the recruitment. And one of the things they came up with was the training facility, which we moved forward with. In fact, we're meeting with them again this week, so, the captains.
Yeah. Now, your increase in manpower was also associated with some a couple officer upgrades to officer positions.
Correct, sir.
Yeah, and when you added an assistant chief last year, did that help with the ratio?
Not assigned per shift. So the OSHA looks at that as more or less assigned firefighters on scene. The deputies and myself are not initially on scene. It takes us some period of time to get there. The initial arriving resources need to have that span of control, that ratio in place for all firefighters who are on scene. So we have currently 1 officer and 7 firefighters. Any additional personnel we make would have to have additional officers to correspond with that ratio.
Okay, and the officer grades right now,
On
chief?
the career, correct.
You want to go from bottom to up? What are the stages?
So from bottom to up on the career side
Yeah.
is going to be firefighter. There's 3 grades, but more or less firefighter,
Firefighter 1 or whatever.
lieutenant,
Yeah.
and then that's it. And then it goes to a deputy chief and chief.
Right. Now, the question is, can you...
Sorry, per scene.
Per scene, it's the same thing.
No, but I mean, if you had 9 men on your shift, and 7 are either fire and paramedic and someone else is someplace else, you still meet your ratios, because there's not 9 now.
No, there's only 8 assigned to the shift. There's 1 of those a lieutenant. We never put more than 1 lieutenant on our shift. There's only 4 lieutenants. There's 1 assigned per shift. And that's something that's different with the police department. In my brothers in blue is they have multiple officers. When I say officers, I mean lieutenants and captains and sergeants that are assigned to shifts. We don't have that. We have 1 lieutenant that's assigned to the shift.
And we talked about this last budget. I like command structures.
It gives the opportunity for the staff as well. We go back to what draws a firefighter to North Haven. Right now, you have a limited opportunity for advancement as well. You have 1 lieutenant position per shift. That's it. So if we're going to look to add more staff, it's a minimal expense. I mean, it really is. You're not talking a lot of money in those calculations, but it will provide a second level of supervision and a second level of officers. And then we'd be at the point where, similar to the police department, if a captain calls out or is on vacation, I don't need to replace the captain. I have a lieutenant there. Right now, I need to replace lieutenant for lieutenant because that's my only officer assigned to that shift.
I wasn't certain if there was some other intermediate officer grade that you would want to create, but...
There is, yes. So that, and if you look on it, it would be a captain. But
Captain.
Correct. So it would...
Which is between...
Lieutenant and a deputy chief would be a captain, correct.
All right.
The new proposal would be that.
So you would have 2 officers per shift? You'd have a
Okay.
lieutenant and a captain?
Yeah. All right. Really quick here, that utility vehicle you're looking for, could that be used for pickup of the paramedic at the hospital?
It could. In theory, I see where we were going with that. The issue is sending the rescue down to go get paramedic. The second the paramedic is back in the rescue, we're able to respond to another call.
Yeah, right.
You wouldn't be able to necessarily do that to the same
Well,
capacity.
I thought you were talking about setting down an engine or something if the rescue truck was already out on another call. Regarding the manpower, your major proposal here, what happens if we don't get the grant to support the program for the first 2 years?
This is for the career, for the staffing grant, correct? Because I
Yeah.
spoke of 2 grants, the apparatus and staffing.
Staff.
So we didn't cover that too much. And the reason for that grant's not even out yet. Hasn't been announced. It has been funded again by the federal government, although I do not know the exact terms of it this year. The intent would be, assuming it hasn't changed from prior years, the intent would be to submit an application for a grant for 16 firefighters and The reason for that is a grant will only underwrite the cost for firefighters if they're being assigned to a suppression apparatus. Meaning I couldn't get a grant to staff from the rescue. It's not a suppression apparatus. It carries no water and it has no ladders. I also can only get a grant if I staff an apparatus in accordance with NFPA 1710, which states an apparatus needs to have 4 firefighters assigned to an engine and to a truck. So the only way I'm getting a grant is if I put in for the full 16 firefighters to assign 4 to an engine. I intend to do that, and if we're successful in getting that grant approved, then the money towards the 8 firefighters this fiscal year can then be used as a cost share match for that grant. Assuming it would have to go back to the public and so forth at a town meeting, I completely understand.
And then were you required to do an additional 8?
Yeah, we would have to take on 16 if we do the
Yes.
grant.
You have to take on 16.
Have to take on.
It's made for a certain size?
It's made,
To match up to certain apparatus?
it's matched up to certain standards, specific standards. The only way the federal government's gonna give you money is if you agree to meet national standards. And national standard is 4 firefighters per engine or 4 per truck. So I cannot write a grant to get 8 for a rescue. That's not allowed. It's not a suppression apparatus, and it's not allowed. There's a reason why, and that's why in 2009, just for the purposes of clarity, that's the reason why in 2009 we were successful in getting the grant for the paramedic. We used it as a paramedic to hire 4 paramedics, but we staffed the 4th firefighter on the engine because national standards say that there needs to be 4 firefighters on the engine. That's why I'm successful in getting that grant as a town, because we agreed to put the next firefighter on an engine to make that 4-man engine.
Yeah, so we won't know by March, budget time, whether we
You will not
get
know,
a
sir.
grant or not.
Correct.
Yeah.
It was only a 2-year grant?
It is, the way that it was last year it was 75% paid for by the federal government the first year, 75 the second year, and I believe 35 the third year. It used to be a 5-year.
So the cost of that personnel, though, if we don't get the grant, is not in your budget.
No.
The cost, no, that's why I'd have to go with.
Cost of that additional personnel is not in the budget.
Right.
In the budget you submitted to us.
Well,
Because it assumes that we're going to get the grant.
It does not, sir, no. The 8 firefighters are in the budget that I provided to you. If we're successful in getting 16 firefighters, we're only owed 25% of that cost. That's 4 firefighters, technically. So if we're successful in getting the grant, the money we're putting aside for the 8 firefighters can be used towards a cost share for the 16. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm just looking at your labor cost, and your
Yeah.
your labor cost hasn't changed here.
We have no additional firemen. Your proposal has dollars associated with additional men. The budget book that we have.
But that's
does
not me. Yeah, I
does
understand.
not.
That's not.
Yeah, the budget doesn't reflect any
Right,
additional.
what I
men right now.
proposed is different than maybe what you have in front of you now.
No, we have your proposal.
Okay.
We also have our budget book, which shows no change in personnel.
Gotcha.
I'm just trying to figure out if this proposal was known, how the Board of Selectmen said to us, expenses only go up 1.5%, when it's clearly not going to be attainable if your labor costs for those additional men have to be added to the budget. Because right now it's not in here. So, I'm just trying to make sense out of everything here.
But do you understand that we can't submit for a grant unless it's gonna be for 16 firefighters? In that, I'm asking for 8, and part of that
You're
is,
asking for 16, really.
well, over a 2-year period, yes,
Yeah.
but this fiscal year, I'm asking for 8. If we're successful in the grant, then the 8
Yeah.
firefighters money we put aside now becomes part of that cost share for that grant. And it kind of buys a second bite at the apple. If the following year, we were successful in getting the first 8, and the following year I put in for a grant to get to 16, to bring us to a 16 total again, the same thing. We're gonna get 2 bites at this grant if things don't change.
Right, but when we ask, if we have to at some point gauge public opinion, we are going to do it from the perspective of telling the public it's a forever commitment for 2 more mills?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
For 2 more mills?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever
Okay.
that number is, the public will know and be presented very clearly what the benefit is and what the impact is tax-wise.
Yeah.
That's 2 mils for this program only.
Yes.
That does not
Exactly.
count the rest of the town or the education.
Right.
But if
Or
you don't,
deduction in state.
if you don't get the grant, if you're not
Or the
running the
reduction in
grant, you
state.
don't have to add 16.
It would be the 8 that we
It would be the
requested this
8,
year.
right, and then I would come to the board again for the following year if we're unsuccessful in the grant and say, I'm gonna try for the grant again. I'd like to add the 8 to staff the second engine. That's why I've kind of set it up this way. I've been asked by the public, why don't you ask for 16 right now? Members of the public have asked of me, and I'd like to give the town the opportunity to get the grant. That's why I've asked for the 8.
Now, would you be able to lessen the blow in terms of possibly relieving some overtime expense if you added a piece of equipment and somehow were able to manage 9-man shifts instead of 10-man shifts?
So the only way to add a 9-man shift right now and add equipment would be to drop the current engine that we have now, the only engine we have now, down to a 3-man engine. It's the only place I can take a man from. Myself and the commission is reluctant to do that because that is the only apparatus you have the officer on right now. When that officer arrives on scene, he already has a daunting task ahead of him to be able to manage that scene until myself or one or 2 deputies arrive. By having 4 men on that engine, he's able to start making those decisions. By having 3 men on the engine, he now becomes an integral part of that engine. He now goes into that scene with this. He can't start making those command level decisions because he's too busy about having to perform the functions of the engine intended to do as well. Right. That's the reason we have 4 men on the engine right now at our headquarters, is because that officer is the only officer. I've asked for an officer in a car before. There's a reason why, because when you first arrive on scene, that officer is calling all the shots. Is calling the shots for, do we call in additional career staff? Is calling the shots for, do we call additional towns to come to the scene? Do we call for additional volunteers? That individual, and that individual only, is the one calling those shots.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you could call in, someone from another shift for overtime if you have an incident, because it's just difficult for us to increase staff for rare situations where you need that many people.
But sir, if you look at the call volume that we're having and how many calls we're missing, we need to increase staff to increase apparatus to be able to cover our call volume. And that's what this comes down to, is the fact that we're continuing to miss calls. So I need to add additional apparatus to cover that influx of calls that are occurring in town.
Mike, for a serious incident, in part of our overtime, we would call in personnel if we had a major structure fire where all 8 of our firefighters were on the scene. We would call in additional overtime personnel in order to cover. So, to call in 1 officer, by the time that officer would be able to get to the scene, I mean, it would be a time issue.
Yeah, all right. I just,
I
just
hear
in conclusion here, as long as you understand that we think you're great advocates for the department you represent, but we are advocates for all the people and we have to balance everything with all the departments. And I'm not, I'm not going to ask you if you get more money and we want to keep taxes level, what department should we cut? Where do we get the money from? I'm not going to do that. But I will tell you that we have a task here, and we're trying to balance safety and cost. And Mr. Frieda may have a solution to help us get feedback down the road.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
I think that's well put.
Yeah.
Just what you said. That's exactly the dilemma. Now,
Take some
Paul and I have met prior to this meeting, and he asked me what type of presentation. I said, lay it all out there for the Board of Finance. Explain it in great detail, including the overtime, because I thought it would be very helpful for many to understand it. So I think you did a great job with this. Sure. And this is going to come down to, for those watching on TV, the chief and the chairman of the Fire Commission have presented what they truly believe to be the needs of the department. It's all going to be, back to Michael's point, what the tax-paying citizens can afford. That's it in a nutshell.
And their expectations, because in this town, when this town decided to have a fire department put together in 1970 or whenever,
67.
Yeah, obviously they want 5-minute response time because they know volunteers have like an 18 or 20-minute response time. So that's what this town decided. Now, do they still have the same set of expectations? And are they willing to pay for it? Because, they still drive through North Branford and see the volunteer companies, and people live without paid fire departments. So, again, this
I would agree, expectation is part of this,
Yeah.
There's lower expectations in other areas.
It's up to public expectations that have been built in this town, that this town is used to. And maintaining that may cost money, but we'll see.
No question,
Thank
Mike, we're compared to North Branford quite frequently, and as the chief indicated in his presentation, we provide services on the highways. Our commercial properties are significantly greater than what North Branford's is, and our call volume is significantly higher. So it's not.
That's great. I know that. No,
it's
no,
not comparing
I know
apples
that,
to apples.
and we know that. But as I say, the average person in this town would just want to know: are we an urban town, or are we a suburban town, or what are we? And what can we afford?
We're
That's
pretty
all.
mixed at this point.
Yeah.
Any other questions from board members?
Good dialogue, great presentation,
Yes.
thank you.
Thanks for your consideration. We appreciate
No,
it.
again, it was a great presentation. I mean, we probably set a record at a 3-hour presentation from one department.
Something other than a Saturday
But
morning,
again,
if you'd like.
and we've always said, year to year, we can't understand how budgets can get harder and harder to put together.
Daunting task.
This year,
take any of my
besides the added
Listen.
request from a bunch of departments, we also have a state that's just
I understand.
rolling everything downhill to us, so.
Look, our opening statement clearly indicated
Yeah.
that we're thoroughly aware of that. But again, it was our responsibilities to make sure, as Mike said,
Granted.
present it all out to you folks.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.